Shaggy shifted his claws back to normal and placed a calming hand on Rita's shoulder. She looked ready to charge. Nearby, the kid on watch was wielding a table leg and looking confused. Shaggy briefly thought about bringing him a baton. But Vance's grumbling brought him back around. The biker was trying to inspect his forearms without taking off his leather jacket. Shaggy growled. "What the hell, Vance? Seriously? What was that about?" Vance plucked at the cut marks on his jacket before he answered. "I was just testing ya. I walked by your freaking lookout 4 times. At least when I attacked. You blocked this time. I could have taken your head off." "I don't think so." Vance grinned. "But your claws have gotten pretty sharp there, pup. What the hell have you been fighting?" Shaggy shifted a hand and grinned as he twisted the black and red claws in the fading light. "They have grown nicely. Little gift from a blood god." Vance raised an eyebrow. "I'd be careful when messing with them gods. A lot of people don't like worse in general. You add a cursed or blessed one to the mix and they'll riot on principle." "Boss?" Rita growled. The woman still looked ready to attack. Her silver sword was held straight. Like she was going to stab at Vance at any moment. Shaggy could feel her tension over the link. In fact, Vic was rushing up here from the tunnels too. By the feel of it. Shaggy sighed and pushed Rita's arm down. He sent calming vibes to his pack and tried to explain. "Long story. But this is my absentee werewolf mentor. He's an asshole, but he's alright." Vance waved and kicked a table over. Grabbing a chair. He nodded at Rita. "Good choice on a pack member, kid. Always need one that questions you. Honestly, that feels like most of them." Shaggy said as he grabbed his own chair and set it at the table. Nearby, the maintenance door banged open and Vic ran into the room. K-Tech rifle humming in his hands. Behind him, Levy was stumbling to keep up. "Hand a light with magic." Shaggy sighed as Rita waved down Vic. But the sharpshooter kept his gun leveled at Vance. Vance grinned at the ominous blue glow at the end of the rifle. "It's fine, Vic," Shaggy said, keeping his eyes on Vance. "Levy, there's water around here somewhere." "I'm fine." Shaggy rolled his eyes as he heard several teens scramble into the deli. He had Vic and Rita corral everyone. As he kept staring at Vance. The older man was watching the proceedings over Shaggy's shoulder and grinning wolfishly. His sharp canines gleamed in what little light there was. After he had seen enough, Vance returned his gaze to Shaggy. He brought up his arm and pointed. "You owe me a new coat." "Just means it had character." Vance sniffed. "Besides, it didn't have these until you made them. Which I wouldn't have to do if you just walked in and said hi." Shaggy shrugged. "That won't do for old man. Vance, will it?" "No, he has to come rushing and swinging." "Well, action meet consequence." "Bah, you new damn batch of worse have no respect. The lot of you are like a bunch of unruly children. Even had to smack a few of you around recently. That seems to be your MO." Shaggy chuckled as Levy brought him a drink. "Thanks, love." Shaggy kissed his wife's hand as she stared daggers at Vance. The old biker took the glare in stride and nodded hello. Levy snorted and said nothing as her eyes glowed purple. Shaggy patted her arm a few times in a calming gesture. "It's fine, Levy. He's an asshole. But he'd never hurt me." "Well, at least not too bad." "Pfft, I don't care about that. He interrupted me while I was building my dream house. I had to pause everything to come up here and save your ass." Shaggy grunted. "Oh please, I would have been fine. You didn't need to rush up here. Besides, Vic was rushing with one of the new guns. Things would have been handled." "Kid," Vance said. "Do those things work well on you?" Shaggy shook his head. "Not really, they sting though." "So what the hell was one going to do against me? Distract you long enough for me to shred your wardrobe?" Shaggy shrugged. Vance snorted as Levy patted Shaggy's arm and walked away. I'm going back downstairs. Rita, can you get the supply train moving again? Vic, you're on watch. Yes, mistress. Both wolves said. Shaggy almost turned as he felt his pack's loyalty to his wife. But he quickly shook it off. They always seemed to like her more. Maybe it was a pack thing. Vance watched the exchange before he raised his eyebrows at Shaggy. A drow wife? Don't know if you're lucky or cursed. Shaggy tilted his head questioningly. But Vance just waved him off. Nearby, Vic kicked a few chairs and tables away as he patrolled around the deli's windows. Once he did a full circuit of the interior. He went outside. Large energy weapon still held at his side. Vance turned and watched Vic leave before saying, another good choice. He has sharp eyes. Shaggy sighed. Why are you here, Vance? I figured at this point you should have a good pack under you. So you might be ready to turn them. Unless you already did. In which case you have to hurry. Hurry? Shaggy's ears perked up at the older man's tone. Yeah. Since you've got a pack under you now, you need to introduce yourself to one of the ruling bodies. What ruling bodies? You mean the government? 'Cause I haven't exactly been a good boy here. Shaggy chuckled. Vance joined in as Vic came back into the deli through the side entrance. Yeah, judging by the hardware, I'd think not. But I didn't mean the HLO or City Hall or anything. I meant one of the bigger packs. Remember I told you there were 3. 2 magical and 1 for the mutts. You need to introduce yourself to the mongrel's alpha. He monitors the mutts around Austin and makes sure they know to stay away from the purists. Why him and not one of the magical factions? Vance got a sour look on his face. It's all part of that purity of werewolf race nonsense. The purists hate mutts and they'd do anything to get you thrown out of Austin. Maybe even Texas. They can't touch you legally. But they'd snipe at you till you did something stupid. But only if you let them know about you. With the mongrels, you're starting with a leg up. Because you are already one of them. Wayne's a good guy. He won't out you to the purist and he'll leave you to your work. Whatever it is. Vance's eyes followed Vic as he did another lap around the deli. Shaggy thought over Vance's word and sighed. It was another thing to add to the ever-growing list. But it didn't sound like it would take that long. All he had to do was present his pack and then come back. Wouldn't even take all day. Maybe he'd even meet some other therianthropes. Once Vic was back through the front door, Vance returned his gaze to Shaggy. So I just need to meet this Wayne guy and we're square? Vance shrugged. Well, you'll have to tell him where you are working out of. Nothing specific, just general stuff. Once he knows that, he'll tell you if any other wolves are running in your area. What you do from there is your business. Wolves are territorial. So you might butt heads with other wolves. But maybe there's another type of were in your area that you won't have a problem with. He'll give you that info and explain some of the more politic aspects of being a were in Austin. I don't have the head or patience for all that nonsense. When do I need to meet him? Soon as possible, really? The last thing you want is to be found out by the purist without Wayne's protection. Just get it done, kid. With that, Vance stood and looked around. Now that's out of the way. Where can I get a bite? I'm famished. Shaggy looked around. Outside, he could see Vic patrolling in front of the deli. The sky was getting darker and Shaggy wondered if they should get another person on watch. Although they still had the grocery job to do. Suddenly, Vic ran around to the side of the building, just as Shaggy heard the door open. 2 exhausted-looking teens came rushing in, followed by a beast of a figure. Seacrest's tongue was lolling out of his serpentine head. The trio looked like they had run all the way here as Vic came rushing through the door. Boss, we need 2 guards up here. Vic said lamely. Shaggy nodded in agreement as Luis and Mari collected themselves. Vance sniffed them as Seacrest moved toward Shaggy. The big lizard looked fine, if a little paler than usual. "Boss, we got spotted. But I think we lost them." "Did they know what you were scouting?" Shaggy asked worriedly. "Not," Louise huffed. "They were watching the road on the way back. We skirted around them to be safe and then booked it back here." "So the grocery store is still a good target?" Mari just raised a thumb as she tried to catch her breath. Louise and Seacrest nodded, confirming that they were a go. Vance straightened as he stopped sniffing the teens. "Groceries? You going shopping, pup?" "Robbing," Shaggy corrected. Vance rolled his eyes. "Why do you lot smell like a bunch of mixed animals?" Shaggy raised an eyebrow, but pointed at Seacrest. "Well, he's in my pack." "No, I mean like other animals. Bears, tigers, and I think a goat?" "What have you been up to? Maybe it's the wild bunch?" "We were just in their territory," Louise guessed. Shaggy shrugged. "The more the merrier." At his words, Mari snapped her head up excitedly. He was about to correct himself when he thought about it. The kids needed something to do, and many hands made light work. Between the lot of them, they could carry a bunch of crap out of there. Seacrest and Vic nodded at his thoughts. Shaggy thought about logistics when two more people sprinted through the open side door. Sybil was hefting a slumped over Tom, and for a second Shaggy was worried. That was until Sybil dumped Tom down on the tile floor of the deli. Tom let out a groan as Sybil blew out a breath. "There. We're here. You can drag your ass down the tunnel." "Oh, come on. I'm wounded. I can't walk by myself." Shaggy sniffed the air and looked over at Tom, searching for any injury. When he didn't find any, he turned to Sybil. The woman collected herself and aimed a kick at the prone Tom. It landed with a meaty thud, and Sybil looked back at Shaggy. "The drones opened fire as we parked the truck. I don't think we got scanned. But Genius here took a few zaps to the back. I drug him to a sewer entrance and we made our way here. I'm pretty sure we got away clean." Tom sat up, looking affronted. "It was a K-Tech drone. It had a super powerful laser, for sure. I was practically dead. If I hadn't spotted the manhole cover, Sybil would have never been able to drag us out of there." Shaggy shook his head as Sybil and Vic started to swat and kick Tom. He turned to Vance and shrugged his shoulders. Behind the old man, he saw more teens and Rita coming back for more supplies. He waved a finger in the air, trying to get everyone's attention. "Everyone, grab something and head back down. We'll let everyone know that grocery shopping is about to begin and anyone that wants to can come." "Are you sure about that, boss? 20-some-odd people are going to look strange traveling at night," Vic said. "We'll stagger it. 2 groups of 10 or so. That way, if we run into gang trouble, we can handle it. I want some of the pack with each group. Sound good?" His pack nodded as the teens looked a little dumbstruck at being invited. Mari was almost vibrating with glee. Rita was already grabbing things off the nearby pallets. As she did, she brought up another point. "We will still want people here. If not in the deli, then in the tunnel. Maybe with some of those rifles. Just as a guard." Shaggy nodded and waved at Luis and Mari. "You know the kids best. Pick a handful that don't want to go. But for now, start grabbing supplies." They all fell about collecting stuff. Even Vance, the old werewolf, grinned as he picked up an entire pallet and winked at Shaggy. Seacrest attempted the same feat and smiled as his new strength allowed him to match the old were. Shaggy shook his head and shoved a bunch of piping into Tom's arms. The lanky were looked ready to complain, but a sharp mental jab over the pack link made him shut up. Vic opted to stay topside and even grabbed a kid to help keep watch. Shaggy nodded as he passed the sharpshooter and heading back to the cave. There was a general energy amongst everyone as they traveled. Shaggy guessed that the kids were excited at the prospect of work. Or maybe at a chance to grab food. Either way, they moved with a passion that had Shaggy chuckling and Rita pissed off. The sword woman looked ready to scream as several of the tired teens now ran past her. Shaggy could see and feel how much Rita was holding back. He sent her calming vibes again and tried to remind her that the kids still needed training. She could take her revenge there. While she looked startled at the thought of teaching the kids to fight, Shaggy saw a wicked grin appear on her face. He briefly wondered what he had unleashed, but he shook it off as he watched Vance turn a pallet sideways to get it into a tunnel. Dirt and rocks fell from the walls as they moved their payload closer to the cavern. Once they arrived, the teens all dropped their stuff and ran off, shouting for their friends. Louise and Mari hurried to explain things to everyone as Shaggy's pack organized everything. Levy was back at the terminal and Shaggy waved the others off as he went to talk to her. As Sybil glared at Tom, making sure he was working, Rita ran off toward the kids, trying to keep them organized. Seacrest was moving some of the bigger pallets closer to Levy. Looking around at all the kids and his pack working away at their own small community they are building made him smile. It also reminded him of Undertown. They really needed to get back in contact with everyone. Almost got this figured out, Levy said as he approached. Shaggy glanced around at all the wood planks and cement bags. She even had a few small potted plants dotted around the terminal. He raised an eyebrow in question, but Levy was too enthralled with the terminal screen to notice. So instead, he asked, "Is this going to be enough stuff?" "Of course not. For everything I've got planned, we'll need much more. But it's a start. Also, you don't want to hit too many trucks in a row. Better to make them relax before we steal more stuff." Shaggy grinned. "Well, me and the pack were about to head out to steal more stuff. Did you want in?" Surprisingly, Levy shook her head. "Can't. I have to watch the ferry. She's still been in and out, and I don't want to leave her here. Besides, I can get this place set up. Maybe even get some power down here and light things up." "How?" Levy held up the pink crystal they had gotten from Jerusa's house. "This can power a few things down here. I'd have to keep it topped up, magically. But as long as we don't drain it, we should be fine. The terminal even recognizes it, so that's a plus." Shaggy shrugged. "All right. I leave all of this in your more than capable hands. Although I was thinking, while we wait for things to blow over, I might want to check on Undertown to see how everyone's doing." "Oh, things have been going great. A few of my witches showed up and they are helping the guys with the bar. They also got into an altercation with the Quinnica, but Vlad and Ren have it handled." Shaggy blinked. "How did you contact them? Magic?" Levy spun and searched his face for something. Not seeing it, she snorted. "Are you serious?" She threw a small object at his chest and, unthinking, he caught it. Looking down, his eyes fell on a small rectangle that he had seen before. Levy's phone. Shaggy slapped his face so hard the sound echoed throughout the cave. People even turned to look. Off in the distance, he could hear members of his pack cackling. Shaggy swallowed his embarrassment and handed the phone back to Levy. "How do you always forget about in-game communication?" "'Cause I'm focused on the here and now. Not on the things that aren't in front of me," Shaggy complained. Levy snorted again and returned to the terminal. As she did, she asked, "Was there a message you wanted me to pass along? My witch friends have also started preparing phones for your friends. They need to come topside to steal or buy them, anyway. Ask Vlad if they can spare ephemera. I need my #1 henchman here." Levy nodded. "Right. To complete your anime harem." Shaggy slapped himself again. "She's an invisible woman that has a decent head on her shoulders. Even if she enjoys a little carnage. I need to make her part of my pack." Sure. Whatever you say, sweetheart. I'll pass it along. Maybe we can send for more supplies too. We essentially have 2 homes now." I want to see about connecting them. Can you do that? With like portals or something? Portal magic is beyond me. But it's not an uncommon school. I could look into it or get one of my witch friends to see what they can find. I'm on the magic stuff, hun. You go keep thinking about the here and now. Shaggy grumbled but gave his wife a kiss and turned back toward his pack. He ignored their grinning faces and waved them toward the exit. Even a few kids were smirking at him. He wanted to smack the little shits, but it was fair play. He had forgotten about the damn phones. As Rita openly laughed and Vance chuckled at him, Shaggy and the large group of teens left to rob a grocery store. Shaggy sniffed the evening air as the sun continued to set. Even with the sweaty teens and his equally sweaty pack, he could still pick up plenty of scent trails. While the roads were pretty clear, the passage of civilians was still on the wind. He wasn't getting animal scents. Besides Vance and his pack, but that didn't mean the wild bunch wasn't on the lookout somewhere. He glanced over to Vance and saw the older man chatting amiably with some teens. Mari was excitingly talking the old werewolf's ear off. Luis and some others were a couple of blocks over, traveling in an equally large group. Shaggy wondered what they must look like. If any residents of the nearby apartments stuck their head out the window, they would see 3 adults traveling with 7 or 8 kids. Maybe they looked like a school outing? Shaggy hoped that was the case. The last thing they needed was for someone to call the cops because a gang of kids was on the streets. According to a kid named Nico, they were only a few more blocks from the grocery store. But then they'd have to wait until the large supermarket closed. Apparently, the store used to be open 24 hours a day. But because of understaffing, they had to pull back the hours. If Shaggy had to guess, it was 9 or 10 in game time. So they probably would have to find a place to chill and keep an eye on things. Which was good. Shaggy wanted his pack to do their own recon. Maybe there was a blind spot for the cameras or a nearby building they could jump over from. Yep, taught him everything he knows. Vance said loudly, drawing Shaggy's attention. When he looked over, Shaggy saw that several teens and Seacrest were staring between him and Vance in awe. He didn't know what the old man was talking about. But he didn't think he liked it. Shaggy snorted and then looked back up the street. You beat my ass and then threw me to the wolves. There wasn't a lot of teaching going on. Bah! Vance shouted, waving a hand. Tough love is the best kind of teacher. It teaches you to be self-reliant. None of that namby-pamby hand-holding shit. You go wolf, you hunt a few punks, then you get a handle on your abilities. I already had a handle on them, dingbat. I just needed you to tell me how to go full wolf. Even that I had to do myself. Hey! I was present for that. When your first hunt went to shit, who pulled you out of the fire? I killed them all. Then you showed up. And I got you out of there before their friends could show up. You would have been dead in that alley. Still refusing to snack on a kill because it was bipedal. Wait. You eat people? One teen asked worriedly. Vance grinned, showing an array of pointed teeth. Wolf's gotta hunt, kid. Meat is meat. One way or another. If you take too long to feed the beast, then it'll overtake you, then consume you. At least that's the case for us pure worse. I don't really know how it works for the mutts. I understand that each is different. Is that what you're doing with us, Perito? Are teaching us with tough love? 'Cause I think I'd prefer a little more teaching. Mari asked Shaggy. Shaggy turned fully and walked backwards as he addressed the group of teens. I haven't taught y'all anything yet. We still need to set up our new home. Once we get everything settled there, then we can figure out your future criminal careers. I don't even know what all of you can do yet. What followed was a barrage of eager teens explaining their skill sets. Seacrest and Vic got the kids to settle down as they drew looks from pedestrians. The few on the streets gave their group a once-over and Shaggy saw a few eyes try to work out the relationship. He ducked his head and kept walking. Thankfully, drones were still few and far between. Which probably explained all the gang graffiti everywhere. Even if there didn't seem to be any gangs. "Mari?" Shaggy called as he turned back around. "Yeah? Are there more gangs around here?" Shaggy pointed to various walls spray-painted with images and alien writing. "There used to be. The wild bunch took most of them out and y'all hit the lampers. The rest of the bunch made allies and consumed. Now there's just one gang in this part of town. Least that I know about." Shaggy nodded as he filed that information away. "Then where are they? Shouldn't they be patrolling their turf? Group of people like us have got to stick out." Mari looked around, as though she was going to see an animal-human hybrid on a roof. Although Shaggy wouldn't doubt it. Not with this game. After she was sure they weren't being watched, she shrugged. "Don't know, Jeef. Maybe they are busy elsewhere in the city. They've been pushing out into other neighborhoods since the cog shit went down. Well, I don't like it. Tell everyone to keep their heads on swivels." Mari gave him a mock salute and fell back to the large part of their troop. Vance took her place grinning like a man without a care in the world. Lord, you gotta love the youth. Full of oil and fire, but too stupid to know you don't mix the two. These kids have enough chips on their shoulders that you could serve salsa and not go hungry for days. Shaggy snorted, but kept his eyes forward and his nose sniffing. Vance noticed and took his own whiff of the air. The old were grimaced, but said nothing. They walked in silence as the kids talked amongst themselves. But Shaggy could feel everyone was on their toes, ready in case they were attacked. But, after a brief uphill stretch of road, a large gray building appeared in the distance. The ground around the building had been flattened, and large swathes of grass surrounded it. But the grass looked unnatural. To Shaggy, it looked too green, and he thought it was artificial. The dirt and cement that surrounded the buildings next to the M-Mart attested to that. Whatever corporate entity behind M-Mart had spent good money to dress up the land their store was located. Which just made it stick out against everything else. A lone green patch amid a sea of brown and gray. Shaggy let out a sigh at the half-full parking lot. The building was doing great business, and any question of the whereabouts of the wild bunch was answered. Several gang members were hanging about the parking lot, shooting the shit and drinking beers. Shaggy spun and shot a glare at Mari and even Seacrass. They had done recon. How had they missed this? Seacrass shrugged, confused, but Mari got angry. They weren't here before. She muttered as they skirted the large parking lot and headed to a nearby block of buildings. Shaggy kept an eye on the 10 gangsters in baggy clothes. Most were animal hybrids, maybe mutants or aliens with animal characteristics. What kind of gang hangs out at the local supermarket like a bunch of out-of-work 20-somethings? Vance tapped his shoulder as they hustled across the street. "You smell that?" Shaggy took a large whiff of the air and tried to focus. But he couldn't get anything different. He shook his head, and Vance snorted. "Need to work on that sniffer. I think the mutts are dealing in some high-powered stuff." "Glow?" Shaggy asked. But the old werewolf shook his head. "Nah, that shit smells closer to sulfur. This is something more medicinal, smells like a solvent, to be honest. Probably something else this group of punks cooked up." They had made it in front of a large department store. There wasn't much foot traffic, so Shaggy thought they were fine. But they also need to be off the streets. No sense waiting around for an hour in the middle of the road. A sharp whistle brought Shaggy attention further down the street. He could just make out Sybil's slight form as she stuck half her body out of an alley and waved. It looked like the second group had gotten here first. Shaggy herded the others toward Sybil's alley. It was just wide enough for a car to drive through, and Shaggy expected everyone to be there. Instead, it was just Sybil. At his questioning look, the little fire starter pointed upward. The brick building they were standing near had a decent-looking fire escape going all the way up. After pointing, Sybil rushed up the ladder and toward the roof. Shaggy shrugged at the look Vance gave him and followed his pack member. A roof was better than the streets, unless a drone flew overhead. Once he had cleared the roof edge, Shaggy looked around. The roof was a solid, cement-looking slab with a large door enclosure sticking out of it. Someone in the building had been growing plants, 'cause the roof had 3 rows of flowers. At the other end of the roof, Rita's group of teens all sat under a plastic awning, looking bored. The awning seemed to be another part of the green-thumbed roofer's little hideaway. It had a small couch and a few chairs, and even a ratty-looking rug. Shaggy briefly wondered about the roof user coming up here, but Rita's voice cut into his thoughts. We broke the handle off the door. We should be alone for a while. Unless they use the fire escape like we did. Shaggy said. Rita just shrugged and continued watching the Mart parking lot. Shaggy sighed, but figured if it came down to it, they could knock the poor gardener out. Clattering behind him let Shaggy know that the rest of his group was coming up. Now it was all about the waiting game. They had 2 hours until the place closed, maybe another 30 to get out all the stragglers, and then they could make their move. He moved to where Vic was crouched, looking at the Mart through the scope of his rifle. Anything of note? Vic snorted. Pfft. You mean besides the random bunch dealer moving around the damn parking lot? Or maybe the undercover cops getting ready to arrest a few buyers and sellers? How about the damn drone cradle sitting on top of the damn Mart roof? What kind of grocery store has their own fleet of drones? Yeah, boss. This job just got a lot more interesting. Shaggy rubbed his eyes and sat down. Okay, I saw the dealers. Tell me about the cops. I spotted 2. It looked like they tried to make a purchase and were rebuffed. They went back to their car and they've been waiting. Probably called in some help. Why didn't the dealer sell? Vic shrugged. No clue. Maybe he scoped the cop before he tried to buy. Either way, that parking lot is going to get rowdy if more cops show up. Will it? I mean, if the cops come, they'll arrest those idiots sooner and we won't have to worry. Or maybe the bunch will hightail it out of there early and give me some peace of mind. Shaggy groaned as he sat back in his hands. Not likely, boss. Rita said. Pointing a finger upward, she added. If more cops come, that means they'll bring their own drones. That means we have a greater chance of being spotted. Shaggy growled as he looked around. The group of teens were all standing and sitting around, looking bored. They were going to need a hell of a good reason to have 20 people standing on a rooftop in the middle of the night. Shaggy sighed and waved a hand at Luis and Mari. Can you guys get lost? Just scatter for a bit, go shopping, buy some food, do whatever. We can't all be up here. Not unless you got some music and party balloons. We need to keep a low profile. Mari looked ready to argue, but Luis put a hand on her shoulder. We gotcha, boss. But we are going to need some creds if we want to buy food, you know? Shaggy growled loudly this time and looked at his pack. Rita and Vic snorted as Tom and Sybil groaned. Seacrest was already taking the credit sticks he had out of his pocket. He was handing them out to a few of the teens who were already standing. They formed a line, and the pack handed out a few credit sticks per kid and reminded them to all meet up in a few hours. Shaggy gave the last one a pat on their slim shoulder and walked over to Vance. You gonna stick around here? Vance kicked up his on a nearby planter and smiled at the dark sky. Yeah, I'll stick around. It's nice to be in the presence of other wers. Not normally my thing, but you do miss it. Once in a while. Shaggy nodded as he returned to his spot next to Vic and monitored the Mart parking lot. He didn't have Vic's enhanced sight, but he could still make out people in the parking lot below. Vic even pointed out the black sedan that the cops were in. Nearby, Tom was rolling around on the roof trying to sleep as Sybil cleaned her older pistols. She had left the police variants behind. They were sure they couldn't be tracked, but better safe than sorry. Rita stood stoic at the edge of the roof, looking out toward the Mart. She looked so thoughtful that Shaggy had to ask. What's got you so thoughtful? Shaggy saw her flex the fingers of each of her hands before she took a deep breath and closed her eyes. I can smell so much, and my body is in the greatest shape I've ever been. It's so much. That's not including the healing and overall increase in strength. A lot to take in, boss. We haven't even transformed yet, Tom grumbled from his spot on the roof. Imagine what that will be like. We don't have to. Vic lit a cigarette and turned to Shaggy. What's it like, boss? Shaggy chuckled and put his back to the wall. Like everything Rita said, dialed up to 11. It's like your senses go into overdrive and you feel utterly invincible. But you are just as fleshy as you normally are. Healing isn't any better. Although you are stronger and faster, you are also way denser. Vance snorted. You gotta be careful where you step when you're a wolf. Otherwise, your heavy ass will go straight through some things. And water's a pain in the ass, Shaggy added. Vance laughed, but nodded in agreement. Tom rolled over onto his stomach and glanced between Vance and Shaggy. That's all good. But when do I get to be a werewolf? Huh? It's been forever since you bit us. It was early today, you jackass, Sybil laughed as she threw a bit of trash from the roof at Tom. The others all chuckled, but Shaggy saw Vance look thoughtful. He didn't know if he liked the old man thinking. Especially if he was thinking about his pack. Rita caught his eye and nodded toward the old were. But Shaggy let it drop. They were on a job and they need to stay focused. A short while later, as they were discussing more aspects of being a werewolf, another black sedan pulled into the M-Mart parking lot. Shaggy swore and handed a credit stick to Vic. Looks like more cops arrived. Vic chuckled. What do you think they'll do? I don't know. Probably arrest the lot of them. Then go inside and get the parking lot cameras. Which means more questions and probably more cops. Everyone nodded at Shaggy's assessment and settled in to watch the situation come to a head. The second black sedan pulled into the edge of the parking lot, right next to its twin. Shaggy figured both cops were going to share info and then the new guys were going to make a run at the dealers. Shaggy heard Vic's rifle shift against the brick roof. Boss, the bunch are on the move. All of them, and they are headed right for the cops. Tom clapped lightly. Huh. Looks like we'll get a show after all. Vance stepped up to the edge of the roof and set a foot on the rim. I don't think so. Suddenly, two flashes appeared between the black sedans. If Shaggy hadn't been paying attention, he would have missed it. It was so quick. Next thing he saw were two people get out of the newer sedan and move toward the first. As they did, the members of the wild bunch joined them. Vic had his eye glued to the scope of his rifle and Shaggy could only guess at what he could see. From his position, it looked like the bunch were going to take the sedan. Did what I think just happen? Rita asked. They killed the other cops. Vic answered, still watching through the scope. The gang members are moving the bodies into the first car's trunk. One of them is handing the second set of cops something. Now the second pair of cops are leaving. That explains why and how they can just do this out in the open. Shaggy said. It's not like the parking lot is a secluded location. Still though, Vance rumbled. Two cops? That's going to raise some questions. Who's going to ask them? Even if they have families, they are going to go to the police and get what? Nothing. Vance shrugged as Shaggy watched the two black cars leave the parking lot. The bunch dealers went right back to selling whatever drugs they had. He grimaced as he watched the dealers happily selling their wares. But there was nothing he could do. Besides, it wasn't really a problem for his crew. If anything, the wild bunch had just cleared an obstacle for them. Now they didn't have to worry about the cops. In fact, anything they did to the M-Mart was probably going to be blamed on the bunch. A grin filled his face as Shaggy came up with an idea. Boss? Rita asked. Shaggy turned and looked at his pack. Everyone except Vic was watching him. He didn't know what they got over their link. but Tom and Sybil were grinning. He grinned back as he opened his mouth. "Let me tell y'all about a partial shift." "What do you mean they're gone?" Shaggy growled. The lanky teen he was shouting at backed away hurriedly. Several of the boy's friends stepped forward around him, in case Shaggy attacked. They all looked terrified, but Shaggy didn't care. They had spent the last hour and a half watching the damn grocery store, and when it came time to start things, Mari had gone missing, along with 3 other kids. Shaggy felt a low rumbling in his chest, and he was sure he was growling like a pissed-off wolf. A hand on his shoulder brought him around to Rita and the others. "Ease up, boss. They don't know where she went. Besides, you know Mari. Damn girl is young, angry, and looking to prove herself. Which probably means she's trying to rob the place right now." Shaggy groaned as he listened to his pack discuss the situation. He took a breath and slowly let it out. He was already pretty angry when none of his pack could master the partial shift, even though Vance had said it was pretty hard, even for pure wurs. But Shaggy had been sure his pack would master it, no problem. What followed was an hour of scrunched eyes and minor headaches. When the kids came back and explained about Mari, maybe he blew a gasket. Blinking, he brought his gaze back to the teenagers. Luis was still out and about with a few others, but he was on his way back. They were literally minutes away from assaulting the store. But if Mari and her friends were about to try something, they would have to move even quicker. Shaggy pinched the bridge of his nose as he waved ahead toward the fire escape. "What about the bunch?" Vic asked. Shaggy groaned. The jackass human-animal hybrids were still in the parking lot, even after the parking lot had cleared out. The bastards stuck around drinking and using whatever was left of the drugs they had been selling. There were about 7 of them, around 2 cars, all cackling like a bunch of hyenas. Shaggy continued toward the edge of the roof as he called over his shoulder. "I'll deal with it. Get everyone in position." There was a scrambling of footsteps behind him as people moved to follow his orders. Shaggy threw himself over the edge of the roof and onto the lower fire escape platform. Ignoring the stairs down to the next platform, he jumped over the edge and caught himself on another lower platform. He did it again and again until he was low enough to jump to the ground. Rapid healing or not, he didn't want to break and heal his knees right before he had to fight a bunch of thugs. He glanced upward to see several teen faces staring at him. But it was the dark mass flying toward him that made him move. Vance slammed into the ground with an ungodly thud. Shaggy had to catch himself as Vance made a gigantic crater in the ground. The old man brushed himself off and started walking with barely a problem. Shaggy wondered if he could have done that, but he didn't think so. He followed Vance toward the end of the alley and was about to ask a question when Luis rounded the corner. The teen mutant almost collided with Vance, but he sidestepped at the last moment. Luis grinned at them, but the smile went away as Shaggy and Vance passed him by. "Where's everyone?" Luis asked cautiously. Shaggy pointed upward at all the kids descending the fire escape. He kept moving. He honestly didn't want to explain what he suspected Mari was doing. Shaggy would leave that for the other teens. Right now, he wanted to bite something. The bunch in the parking lot were a ready-made target for his aggression. Vance tapped his shoulder as he walked. "Don't be mad at your pack. I told you that is some high-grade shit you were trying to get them to do. Especially since they haven't had their first shift. Seriously, they are babies that haven't begun to crawl and you want them to do gymnastics? Manage expectations. But it was so easy for me?" Shaggy groaned. "Was it?" Vance raised an eyebrow. Shaggy thought back. When he had first entered the game, he thought his powers were broken. No matter what he tried, he couldn't get the wolf part of his power to work. It was the professor that helped him figure it out. But only when he was getting his ass kicked by a certain cat lady. Then there was the fight with the Quinnica boss guy. Once he had gotten the feeling down, it had become easier and easier. But getting to that first state wasn't really easy. Shaggy sighed. No. No, it wasn't. Still, I can feel their desire to shift, not to mention their disappointment. They all feel like they are failing me every time they can't shift. It's a lot to take in. It also quintuples the anger when you are all mad about the same thing at the same time. Vance said. Shaggy snorted but nodded as they continued up the street. The grocery store parking lot was just over the small grassy hill. They couldn't see the punks yet, but Shaggy was sure they were still standing around getting high and yammering on. He took a deep breath and tried to center himself. His packed disappointment still hovering in the back of his mind. Muted footsteps told him that the others were all following along quietly. As they cleared the hill, Shaggy moved to a spot away from the closest parking lot light. Several of them dotted the lot, and Vic had confirmed that a few had cameras. They waited for the others to catch up and Shaggy formulated a plan. A stupid plan, but a plan nonetheless. So, can I help them crawl at all? Shaggy asked, taking off his shirt. His clothes would sometimes shift with him. But not always. He figured better safe than sorry. Vance snorted and smacked Shaggy on the back of his head. The blow came as his shirt was in his face. So it nearly sent Shaggy to his knees. Vance ignored him. You're their alpha. Not only can you, but you are damn near required. You have to help them handle the change and manage whatever bloodlust they have. Bloodlust? Yeah. You lucked out. Probably 'cause your shifting emotion was the lack of emotion. But if one of your pack is a rager, things can get sticky. I don't think any of my pack shifts with anger. Otherwise, that roof we were standing on would have collapsed under the weight of 5 werewolves. Mad with your friends is one thing. Pissed off at an enemy is a different beast altogether. Vance put a hand on Shaggy's bare shoulder and shook it. But don't worry about that stuff for now. You have food to grab and enemies to hunt. Hop to, oh mighty alpha. Shaggy tried to suppress a laugh and turned to the teens and his pack. They were all standing in the grass that ringed the grocery store parking lot. Some teens looked at him weirdly, but he didn't blame them. He was standing shirtless in the dark. Thankfully, it wasn't a chilly night. He straightened up and plastered a grin on his face. Several teens took a few steps back, but he ignored them. So Mari is probably off somewhere about to trigger an alarm. So this quiet theft has become a snatch and grab. I will deal with the bunch in the parking lot. The rest of you try your best to avoid the cameras and get to the building. If you can disable a camera, do it, then keep going. Our goal is at least 1 truck of food tonight. So once we are inside, we need to hit the warehouse and steal a truck. Once we are inside though, that means the cameras are going to see us and we are probably going to raise an alarm. So move fast and grab what you can. What about Mari? Luis asked. I do not know what she is planning. But unless we know where she is, we can't do anything about it. So keep an eye out and leave any scolding for later. What are you going to do about the cameras, boss? Sybil asked. Shaggy grinned and waved a hand down his shirtless body. I'm going to get changed and do some hunting. A big-ass wolf is going to be a lot harder for them to track down. Unless they get the mages on things. Vance muttered, but Shaggy ignored him as he felt the shift take him. Several of the teens gasped in alarm as Shaggy's body started to twist and reform itself. Shaggy tried to focus his mind on what he was feeling. But the shift had become so smooth that he barely recognized when one became the other. The wolf reared up in his mind, pounding at the cage in his mind. Eager to hunt and kill. Shaggy wrangled the feeling and turned toward the drug-addled gang members. They still hadn't seen him or the others. Shaggy sent orders to wait a few seconds before following him and rushed off. He felt his claws dig into the pavement of the parking lot, and his inner wolf was elated to be running free. Even if it was a quick sprint toward the bunch and their 2 cars. Shaggy ignored all thoughts of creeping up and surprising the bunch and instead barreled forth. As he passed under the parking lot lights, Shaggy's vision shifted between color and the gray of his night vision. It was almost distracting, but when as he pounced and the bunch noticed his presence, the parking lot went dark and his vision stayed gray. Shaggy ignored the sudden change and focused on attacking the gang members. His front paw slapped a Tigerman into his own car. Shaggy snapped his jaws around a Birdman and tossed him aside. Loud cracks and shouting told Shaggy that the low-level thugs were shooting at him. His wolf laughed and he dove in, clawing and biting. Their flesh tore easy, and Shaggy had to staunch a howl before it bellowed from his throat. Blood poured over his fangs, and he could feel it sliding down his throat. But Shaggy ignored it as he bit and clawed the nearest enemy. It was a short and brutal fight. One which Shaggy did not remember fully when he came back to himself. The wolf had taken over, and he was not even a passenger to what had occurred. He was caught in a lucid dream, where he was barely aware of what was happening. He shook the feeling from his lupin form. It was disconcerting, but not as alarming as the parking lot suddenly falling into darkness. Shaggy could see the teens and the members of his pack rushing toward the front door of the grocery. Vance, however, stood stock still in the parking lot, staring open-mouthed at Shaggy. Shaggy twisted his head quizzically, but ignored the old man as he ran to catch up with everyone. Vance ran to catch up, but when he did, he remained silent and merely studied Shaggy's demon wolf form. They caught up with the others easily enough, and their group seemed ready to crash through the front of the store. But a figure swung the form open for them as they approached. Mari grinned widely and waved an arm as if inviting them inside. "Don't get distracted. Finish the job as planned." Shaggy sent down the pack link. Rita and the other members of his pack charged past the small girl as her friends shouted in amazement and surprise. Louise hugged Mari and was about to say something. But Shaggy shifted and marched toward the pair. He felt his wolf roar at being caged, and he stumbled a few steps. Shaggy shook it off again and admonished his inner wolf. "See, Jeef. We are in and the security is down. We have no." Her voice fell as Shaggy glared at her. He said nothing, merely looked between her and the others. His inner dialogue with the wolf was still raw in his mind. The angry and raw power pulsed through him, and Shaggy almost felt like he was going to shift again. Instead, he walked around the mass of teens. "Get moving. We have work to do." Shaggy could hear the growl in his voice, but he couldn't control it. His rage was roaring through him and he tried to get a handle on it. He marched into the grocery store. The scents of meats, vegetables, and other various sundries assaulted his sense. Shaggy had to stop as the smells made it even harder to quell the wolf. Suddenly, a cool hand fell on his shoulder and Shaggy realized he was still shirtless. Turning, he saw Vance glancing at him worriedly. "What the hell was that?" Shaggy grunted and smiled. "Demon wolf form. Hell of a ride." "Huh." Shaggy cackled at his own joke as he tried to wrangle his feeling. Vance gripped Shaggy's head hard and stared deep into his eyes. Shaggy's new blue ones met Vance's brown, and the old werewolf looked actually concerned as he studied Shaggy's face. He twisted Shaggy's head back and forth until he either found what he wanted or grew bored. Vance released him and continued to stare at Shaggy. Finally, he muttered. "You got something riding shotgun, kid. You are going to have to deal with that before you do anything wolf-related again. Please. It's just a little demon blood." Shaggy snorted. "Maybe. But whatever those punks outside were snorting got into you. I don't know if your new passenger loved it or hated it. But it got a response. It's just the wolf, Vance. Nothing to be worried about." Vance raised an eyebrow. "Damn it. You have a wolf?" "Yes?" Shaggy said, confused. "Don't all werewolves?" "No. God damn it. I told you. All mutts are different. If you have an inner beast, then you are closer to a purebred were than I thought. If that's the case, we have to get you back to someplace safe where you can tame the damn thing." Vance grabbed Shaggy by the arm and almost dragged him back out the front doors. Shaggy had to drag his feet into the tiled floor of the grocery store. Vance groaned and turned to glare at Shaggy, but he kept trying to yank his arm out of the old man's grip. With little success. Food first, Vance. Wolf stuff can wait till after. We need to get all of this settled and then we can leave. Vance stepped right into Shaggy's personal space and stared down at him. Shaggy wasn't that much shorter, but with how close they were, he had to look up a little. Vance studied his face again and Shaggy realized the wolf was gone. Asleep? He wasn't sure, but it wasn't as near to the surface as before. Vance must have seen the same, because he blew out a breath and slapped both hands on Shaggy's shoulders. Staring at him, Vance spoke gravely. You have an inner wolf inside you. Same as a pure blood were. But yours has been amplified by whatever that blood god did to you. You need to tame it, and fast. As soon as possible. If that inner wolf gets loose, I'm going to have to put you down, son. I don't want to know what an uncontrolled blood god champion werewolf can do. That's just terrifying. Shaggy nodded slowly, taking in the old man's words. He briefly wondered how all of this worked game mechanics-wise. Had other wers gone through something similar? What would it be like to tame his inner wolf? At the thought, he felt his inner wolf huff and practically chuckle at the notion. Shaggy raised an eyebrow at his inner wolf and wondered if it was a completely foreign being or a part of him the game had created. He was brought out of his musings by the sounds of the teens running up and down the aisles. They had grabbed several shopping carts and started zooming down the aisles on them. He didn't see his pack anywhere, but he felt them off toward the back of the store. Growling, he nodded at Vance and then wrangled the kids. Come on, people. We need to get this stuff out to the trucks in the back. We need to hurry. Mari giggled from nearby. She was standing near a checkout counter, playing with the scanner. Relax, Perito. We have plenty of time. We disabled all the cameras and alarms. Shaggy marched over as he asked. Who exactly is we? Me, Rue, and Dee. We came in when the place was open and hid in the bathrooms. Once we were sure that the place was empty, we moved into the control room. Rue sent a shock down into the main computer and BAM. All the lights went off, and the system went down. Meanwhile, Dee started packing pallets in the back. We are golden, Jeef. Shaggy slapped himself in the face and tried to remain calm. What about the cops that patrol this area? We'll be fine. No cops come by here, even if they are supposed to. Suddenly, sirens squawked from outside. They turned to see a cop car in the parking lot as a door behind them slammed open. A young boy with bright red hair came skidding out of an office room looking panicked. Mari. I think we hit a silent alarm. We were fine a second ago. Mari shouted as she and the other teens grabbed what they could and sprinted. Shaggy let the kids go and ran toward the office where the redhead boy had come from. On the way, he grabbed said boy and walked him inside. The office was the grocery's main control room. A large row of monitors sat embedded in the wall above a large master control board. A knocked-out security guard dressed in a white shirt and blue pants lay on the floor of the room. Seated at the terminal was a short, mousy, brown-haired girl who was worriedly tapping away. Shaggy tried to examine the information scrolling by on all the monitors, but it was all nonsense. The system is coming online. The cameras are still down, but I think the alarm system came on first. Hit it again, Rue, the redhead shouted. I tried that. But it just keeps rebooting faster and faster. It's like someone from outside the system knows we keep trying to turn it off. Well, do something. The boy, D, shouted. Rue turned to scream at him, but saw Shaggy, and her voice stopped. Dee seemed to realize who had a hold of his collar and hurriedly tried to stammer something. Shaggy, though, ignored the two teens. Instead, he released the boy and grew his claws. With little thought, he dove into the computer terminal with both claws, shredding metal and glass until sparks flew. Shaggy checked his work and then turned toward the kids. Go. Grab what you can and get to the back of the store. Rue and Dee stared at him until he shooed them away roughly. Shaggy followed the pair and ran toward the back. Outside, he could hear the sounds of someone banging on the front door. Luckily, whoever was in last remembered to lock it. Shaggy did a quick scan around before he dashed into the back of the store. But it didn't look like anyone was left. As he entered the warehouse attached to the store, Shaggy was happy to see 2 trucks backed up to the loading dock doors opened. Teens were hurriedly throwing stuff in as his pack was lifting and moving pallets. Vance was grabbing 2 pallets at a time, and the trucks were filling up nicely. But a loud crash from the front of the store stopped everyone. Shaggy rushed forward and shouted, "Okay, that's it. We're done. Everyone into the trucks. Vic, I want you in the tailing truck in case they send drones at us. If you see them, shoot them down. We can't have them following us. We can help." Mari shouted, summoning a fireball into her hand. "Cover your damn faces somehow." Rita shouted from the other truck. The kids immediately started taking off their jackets and ripping their shirts, making impromptu face masks. Shaggy shook his head as he got into the first truck. Sybil and Rita moved toward the truck's cabs as everyone piled in. The large double doors leading into the grocery store burst open as 2 cops came running through them. Shaggy gave a jaunty wave as the 2 trucks pulled away from the M-Mart. They weren't going quick, but as they rounded the corner of the building, Shaggy didn't see any other cop cars. He briefly wondered how fast the cops would be as Sybil turned their big truck toward home. Shaggy kept an ear out for drones. But so far, everything seemed to go fine. He sat back on one pallet as the teens struggled to roll down the truck's back door. It was tricky now that they were moving, but they all agreed it would make them less conspicuous. Vance sat on a pallet opposite Shaggy and grimaced. "We gotta get that wolf of yours under control." Shaggy raised his hands in capitulation. "I get it. But can we get home first?" Vance just snorted as a low cheer went up from the teens. Shaggy let them have it. It wasn't the cleanest of operations, and he was going to give Mari an earful. But for now, they got their food, and their new hideout was under construction. It was time to sit back, relax, and go to war with his inner demon. Shaggy adjusted his sitting position again. The dirt of their cavern home wasn't the most comfortable. He mentally made a note to have his pack steal some chairs in the future. A low growl came from in front of him and Shaggy sighed. He refocused his attention inwards and tried to find his inner wolf. Which, now that he was back underground and safe, was being annoyingly quiet. Vance's growl disappeared and Shaggy did his best to concentrate. Once they had gotten back home, the old werewolf didn't even give Shaggy a chance to help unload the groceries. No, Shaggy was corralled all the way down to the inner cavern and made to sit in the dirt and meditate. Something he had rarely done before. If his pack had anything to say about what was happening, they kept it to themselves. They and the teens set about unloading pallets of food into the cave. The inner cavern had brightened with the various lamps they had stolen and the occasional fire. But with Levy's recent addition, it was practically daytime in their underground home. Shaggy wasn't sure where or how she had got a bright light source to hang in the center of the cavern, but he was thankful for it. Judging by the sounds of relief from the kids moving pallets, so were they. That wasn't Levy's only additions to the cave. While they had been gone, his wife had been busy. Several large green trees dotted the circular dirt field of the cavern. Not little growing plants, full-grown trees that shot up into the air with the branches spreading wide. 2 large buildings sat on either side of the exact center of the cavern. One was thin and tall, while the other was squat and short. Shaggy guessed they were the housing for his pack and the teens. But he hadn't had time to ask. Levy was at the center of the cave, blue outlines of walls surrounding her as she worked out the blueprint for their home. Shaggy really wanted to see what she was planning, but Vance was practically on top of him. "You're not concentrating," Vance growled again. Shaggy huffed and opened his eyes. "Of course I am. But this damn inner wolf thing isn't listening. I think it's asleep. Should we try again in the morning? A sharp blow landed on top of Shaggy's head. He had tried to dodge it, but Vance apparently had clocked his speed. You don't work on his schedule. He works on yours. You need him, you call him up. But first you gotta bring that dog to heel. Yeah, I don't think my wolf heals. Okay. So I got to wake up the grumpy demon wolf. Then what? We fight until one of us yields? Fight, talk, stare at each other. Whatever it takes. Although from what I know about you, your wolf is going to be a pain in the ass. Where does he come from? Is he a part of my mutation? Do all wars have inner wolves? Damn it, I'm not a teacher. Vance groaned. Literally your job, Shaggy said. Fine. Most normal, pure wars have one. Some believe it is the psyche, breaking off the more primal part of our minds, to preserve the human side. Confronting your inner wolf is basically you trying to merge the two aspects back into one. So it's still kinda of you, just more animal. But with you being the blood god's champion, your inner wolf got an upgrade. As for your mutation, I do not know. Most of you mutts don't go through the same things us pure wurs do. But maybe your mutant abilities mirror a standard werewolf so much that you got one. Do I have to worry about my pack? Are they going to go through this nonsense too? Vance shrugged again. I doubt it. But if they do, then it'll be the normal nonsense and not this demon wolf shit. Shaggy stretched out his legs in the dirt and thought about it. Sybil was the only one to get an extra helping of demon when the change happened. So maybe she'd get the same crap. But it didn't sound too bad. All he had to do was come to an agreement with his inner wolf. He wondered how the game was going to represent that. Would he meet a shadow version of himself? He grinned as he brushed dirt off his jeans. Vance smacked the top of his head again. Quit grinning like an idiot and get back to focusing. You need that wolf under control. Shaggy sighed and closed his eyes again. He tried to relax his entire body and focus inward. The few times he had felt the wolf, it had been somewhere in the center of his ribs. Like a burning mass of anger ready to snap at the world. But now all he felt was nothing. His damn wolf was ignoring him. Shaggy snorted at the audacity of his inner wolf. But at the same time, he understood. Shaggy also had a problem with authority. But this was his inner wolf. It needed to wake up and realize who was boss. That thought caused a flare of indignation in Shaggy's chest. He grinned. Oh, you didn't like that? How about this, you're a two-bit mutt who's trying to get off the leash. Well, I'm going to yank on that leash until you realize I'm the one driving this bus. Get used to it. As Shaggy continued with his mental diatribe, he felt his chest heat and his inner beast stir. He kept up a litany of insults, trying as hard as possible to make the wolf matter and matter. Until he felt it was fully awake and roaring in his chest. Shaggy tried to focus on it as it batted against its mental prison. Not knowing what to do now, Shaggy reached out with his mind and tried to quell the beast. But when he made contact, everything went dark and his hearing left him. Shaggy started awake and found himself in another black void. The only light was cast down from above him, creating a golden cone that lit a small area. He looked around but found that other than darkness, he was alone. He tried to move out of the light, but it followed along with him. After running back and forth, trying to see if the light could keep up, Shaggy grinned and shouted out into the dark. Hello. If this is supposed to be some kind of scare tactic, you might want to turn off the light. Nothing answered him, not even an echo. Shaggy thought he had glitched the game somehow. Maybe he fell into a hidden dev room? He was about to log out when his senses picked up a presence behind him. Shaggy spun, surprised that whoever it was had gotten so close. As he did, he called up his claws and got ready to fight. But what he saw made him stop in his tracks. Before him, under the golden light, was another version of him. It was dressed exactly like him, had the same scars and facial features. The only difference was the other Shaggy's eyes were dark red pits surrounded by inky blackness. Shaggy snorted at the old gaming trope. "I get it," Shaggy called out to the darkness. "This is one of those shadow self type of things, where I think I have to fight myself. But really I need to accept that everyone has darkness inside them, right? Well, here I am. Accepting my darkness." Shaggy grinned as he opened his arms to his dark self. Like he was about to hug himself. Shadow Shaggy grinned, showing a large row of sharp teeth. Shaggy grimaced. He didn't realize that was what he looked like when he smiled. It was a little disconcerting. Like a shark trying to play nice. But Shaggy shook it off and moved in for the hug. Shadow Shaggy raised its arms too, and Shaggy was sure he was on the right track. Until his doppelganger's left hand blurred and he felt a sharp pain in his nose. The next thing Shaggy knew, he was flying through the dark, the cone of light trying its best to keep up. When Shaggy's momentum stopped and he slammed into the ground, he tried to jump to his feet. But his surroundings had changed again. He was back in the brown cavern. Except now he was embedded in a dirt wall. As he tried to get his bearings, he saw several trees ablaze with green fire. Smoke and screams filled the cavern. Nearby, Seacrass was lying in the dirt unconscious. Vic was trying to rouse the big lizard. Levy was casting some spell over Sybil. Rita and Vance were standing in front of him, looking worn down and exhausted. Vance's clothes were torn and Rita's armor was indented in places. Both had large cuts on their bodies, but they were healing quickly. Shaggy didn't see Tom anywhere. But Vance's annoyed voice stopped him from checking the pack link. Shaggy tried to respond, but all that came out was a groan. He realized he, too, was pretty bruised and beaten up. His clothes were torn, and he had several large cuts all over his body. Nearby, Rita's silver sword lay in the dirt. His healing was doing its thing, but it was taking a while. As he tried to move, the dirt encasing his body shifted, and he fell forward in a mass of dirt. He felt his cuts sting as dirt rubbed into them. But he pulled himself slowly forward. Everything hurt. Once he had gotten used to the pain, he asked, brilliantly. "Wha? That?" Vance shouted, pointing at Shaggy. "The whole shitshow that just happened." Shaggy quirked an eyebrow and tried to figure out what the old wolf was talking about. But Rita cut in for him. Huff doesn't know few, he doesn't remember a thing." Shaggy nodded dumbly as he spotted teens running around putting out fires. Luckily, it seemed that Sybil and Seacrass were the only two to be hurt by whatever hit them. Vance was still standing there, flabbergasted, and even Rita seemed annoyed. "Like a damn Wolverine on drugs." Vic shouted from his spot near Seacrass. Shaggy tried to remember what had happened. But beside his trip to the dark dimension and Shadow Shaggy, he remembered nothing. Vance blew out an annoyed breath as several large claw marks healed over. His black shirt and jacket were almost ripped to shreds. Seeing Shaggy looking confused, the old were calmed slightly. But then an aggrieved look came over his face. "You got to go back." Shaggy's neck nearly snapped from how hard it twisted to look at the older man. "What the hell are you talking about?" Shaggy felt his pack recoil slightly at Vance's words. But the old werewolf was adamant. "You need to contact your inner wolf again. Now, last time you did, it seems the damn thing took your body for a test drive." "Arg!" Sybil shouted as she sat up. Levy still casting whatever magic she was using to heal the short blonde were. "Hooped our assess is what he did." Vance nodded as Shaggy grimaced. But a thought occurred to him. "Wait. Why do I need to do it again? Shouldn't I get stronger first and then go back in?" "Hell no. That damn thing kicked our assess. What do you think it's going to do if you get even more powerful?" Shaggy took in the destruction around the cavern. He believed that the fire on the trees had been Sybil's fault. But judging by how run down and beaten his pack and Vance looked, he dreaded to think what would happen if his inner wolf took over again. Again, he wondered where Tom was, and Vic answered as Seacrest finally sat up. The large lizard looked confused, but all right. Tom is getting the kids situated. He's a sneaky bastard, but I don't think he'd last against your other half, boss. Shaggy nodded as he was slowly surrounded by Vance, his pack, and Levy. His wife was trying to keep a grin off her face. This was awesome, gaming-wise. He was a boss mob for his crew and wife. Although he doubted the NPCs felt that way. He thought again about trying later. They could all get a rest and get the fires put out, then try again. But Vance stepped forward. Now, Shaggy. You got to get a hold of that thing. If you are tired, then it's probably feeling the same. Get in there and take it down. I wasn't expecting your wolf to be so demonic. But I am more than ready this time. I'll keep the thing pinned on this side. You just get in there. Rita snorted as she moved to pick up her sword. She gave Shaggy a wide berth as she did. You looked ready last time, old man. Levy finally let her own grin peek through. It surprised everyone last time. This time, we know what to expect. With that said, Levy waved a hand, and purple manacles sprung from the dirt. Shaggy grunted as the large cuffs slammed around his wrists. He looked incredulously at his wife. But Levy grinned and blew him a kiss. Demon, you is hot. Levy cackled as he tested the magical manacles. Noted. All right. Enough talking. Get in there and bring the thing to heel. We'll take things from here. Sybil and Vic drew their weapons, and Seacrest looked ready to tackle him. Rita held her sword at the ready as Vance threw his jacket and shirt to the dirt floor. Levy blew him another kiss, and Shaggy knew he was going to back in. He needed to get this done. Kicking himself for thinking it was a trope, he looked inward again. This time his inner wolf invited him in eagerly, and Shaggy felt his consciousness seeped into the darkness. He came awake in the same black void with the golden light shining on him. He briefly wondered why his mental space was an empty void, but he shook it off as shifted. If he was going to do this, it was going to be in his strongest form. The shift was upon him as he felt more than saw his inner wolf appear in the light again. This time, he didn't stop himself, and as he shifted, he kicked out with his growing wolf legs. The transformation finished as he felt his feet connect with a large, furry shape. As he spun and landed on all fours in his wolf form, Shaggy came face to face with a large black wolf. His inner demon wolf was the same size and color as him. Right down to the new demon horns. Except where Shaggy's horns were black, the demon wolf's were burning red with fire. Shaggy grimaced as his inner wolf barely registered his kick. They stared at each other for a few seconds before Shaggy pounced. Remembering that his pack was back in the other world fighting this demon. Shaggy opened his jaws wide and snapped at the other wolf's neck. But it darted away and batted at him with its large front paw. Shaggy took the hit and returned one of his own. He felt his claws dig into the furry hide of his alter ego. Black blood fell into the void as Shaggy drew his front paw back and pounced forward again. The other wolf rolled out of the way and came up to its feet. It snarled as its wounds closed. Shaggy swore mentally and dashed forward again. He needed to do more damage quickly. He swiped again with his front claws, but his inner wolf was ready and snapped its jaws around Shaggy's front paw. The demon wolf twisted and dragged Shaggy to the ground. Shaggy and the other wolf twisted on the floor, snapping and biting at each other. Shaggy felt chunks of his flesh come away as red and black blood mixed on his face. But he gave as good as he got, tearing a chunk off the demon wolf. He even got his back legs up and started ripping into the demon's wolf's belly. The combat was so ferocious that when it suddenly ended, Shaggy was stunned. He momentarily thought he had won as the other wolf was gone. But a quick glance around showed Shadow Shaggy back in his human form, running away. Shaggy snarled and ran after his doppelganger. The light overhead kept up with Shaggy as he ran his alter ego down. The inner demon was fast, but no match for the four-legged werewolf. Shaggy launched himself on top of Shadow Shaggy and bit down. The inner wolf howled in pain and Shaggy jerked his head back and forth wildly. He felt the other Shaggy go limp and finally dropped him. He wanted to howl in victory, but he stopped himself and watched. It would be just like him, to play dead just to back a last-stitched effort. But Shadow Shaggy's wounds weren't healing and Shaggy thought it was okay to shift back to human. Still weary, he tried to keep an eye on the prone form of himself. Once he was back to human, he kicked the inner demon wolf over. He gave a cry in alarm as Shadow Shaggy's eyes were still wide open and glowing red. The noise echoed into the void and then came back to him, making Shaggy grimace at the sound of his scream. He was happy no one else was around for that. Shaggy put a foot on either side of his doppelganger's chest and stared down at his own face. The beast didn't appear to be breathing anymore, but something about the way the thing's eyes still burned unsettled him. With a flick of his wrist, Shaggy summoned his claws and slashed them across his inner wolf's neck. His own face glared back at him, but did nothing else. Even as Shaggy tore its head from its body. As black blood fell away deeper into the void. Shaggy watched the red eyes of the inner wolf fade and then go completely gray. He tossed the head away and watched it sink into the void. Now Shaggy howled in triumph. Shaggy came back to himself and immediately noticed something strange. On top of the staggering amount of pain he was in, he also felt overwhelmingly warm. Like he was covered by a huge, rough blanket. He thought, momentarily, that it was a sign of him finally conquering his inner beast. But a quick glance around proved him wrong. "Why in the hell are you hugging me?" Shaggy asked, voice muffled by Vance's shoulder. Loud breathing and his pack link let him know seagrass was draped over his back. The large lizard's head was right next to his ear. Shaggy tried to jerk away from the hot breath, but pain in his arms and legs screamed through him. His friends cautiously pulled away. With Vance being the last to let go. Shaggy saw that Vic had held his waist as Sybil, Levy, and Rita stood nearby. Levy and Sybil had their weapons drawn, but Rita was strangely unarmed. "We were holding down your damn-blasted demon wolf," Vance grumbled. "Thanks to your wife and pack, we held you back." "Barely." Shaggy's nod of acceptance brought a fresh wave of pain through his whole body. The magical manacles were still in place. He could feel how they had rubbed the skin of his wrist raw. However, a shooting pain in his left leg drew his eye to a leather-wrapped hilt of a sword. Shaggy raised an eyebrow and glared at Rita. "Seriously? Demon asshole was a kicker, boss." Rita shrugged, looking unapologetic. Shaggy groaned as he tried to stand, the magical manacles falling away. He gave his wife a tired grin and pulled the sword from his leg. The wound remained open, blood pouring into the dirt. Shaggy could sense his healing ability had run dry. A loud gurgle from his stomach confirmed this. Everyone glanced at him before he waved them off. Vance was still studying his face and seemed just as exhausted. Luckily, the demon wolf fight hadn't taken that long, it seemed. Shaggy snorted as Vic and Sybil spun around angrily. The short blonde woman marched over as Vic called back. "Yes, we're all clear. Get everything back in order. We need that food. Also see how much the fire damaged." There were some grumblings as Tom and the teens filed back into the cavern. Shaggy guessed that they hadn't run that far to get away from him. Shaggy took a tentative step forward to help, but he immediately stumbled. Right into Vance's arms. The old wolf grunted as he caught Shaggy by the arms. They stared into each other's eyes for a second before Vance rolled his eyes. With a huff, Vance dropped Shaggy into the dirt and stepped back. Levy and Rita yelped and growled respectively at the old man's action. Levy helped Shaggy to his feet as Rita retrieved her sword. "You look fine now, son. We just need to see how your wolf reacts when you change now." "I killed it. The wolf is gone," Shaggy said, almost with pride. Vance took a step forward and tried to flick Shaggy's head. But a purple wall of magic popped up between the finger and Shaggy's forehead. The finger was locked onto the purple shield as Levi glared at Vance. Levi quickly released the magic, and the old were took a few steps back. Coughing awkwardly as he was given control of his hand back, Vance muttered. You can't kill your wolf, stupid. It's you. You are the wolf. You just taught it that you're the boss. It'll be easier to control now. But you're not going to be able to shift while it heals. You need to realize that you and it are one. You need to operate as one. What if it gets uppity again? I have to do this all over again? Vance waved a hand dismissively, but then a thoughtful look formed on his face. Finally he said. I don't know. Normally not. But with you mutant worse? Who could say? That's fair. Shaggy grunted as he and Levi started walking. He wasn't sure where his wife was leading them. But he hoped she had finished their log cabin. They walked through the cave collection of sparse trees, Rita and Vance following behind. Nearby, the teens checked on their campfires and personal items. They didn't have much, but everything seemed to be fine. Although everyone aside from his pack and Levi seemed to not want to look at him. Which was fair. The guy they had followed into an underground cave just went beast mode all over the place. Probably a hell of a thing to see. Shaggy expected a few of the kids to run back home in the coming days. Levi sat him down as gently as possible next to the metal terminal. Vance and Rita seemed to stare off into space. Shaggy didn't think they could see the terminal. But who knew? Instead, he decided to give out orders. Although he wasn't sure Vance would follow them. Vance, why don't you grab us some food? Rita, can you get all that sorted out? We can inventory later, but for now, make sure everything is stored away down here. Also, check if the kids who dumped the M-Mart trucks are back. Finally, set some lookouts. Rita looked like she wanted to argue, but she just gave a curt nod before she walked away. Vance glared at Shaggy. Probably trying to non-verbally remind Shaggy that he didn't work for him. Shaggy smiled back until the old werewolf marched off, grumbling. Levi snorted as she tapped away at the terminal's holographic keyboard. You are a pain in the ass. You know that? What did I do? I didn't know my mutation would work out this way. Besides, it doesn't look like I did too much damage. True. Your weird-ass fire wolf lady did most of it. She needs to learn to control a fireball. Can you help with that? MMHM. Shaggy looked up at Levi as she gave her non-answer. She seemed enthralled with whatever the terminal was telling her. Shaggy waited as she pondered whatever she was thinking about. Soon she came back to the conversation. Yeah. I can help. She answered. The damage to the trees wasn't too bad either. The mana crystal can have them back in order. We can still have our tree grove. That's fine. What about our house? Levi fell into silence again and Shaggy groaned as he tried to look at her. Everything still hurt. So much that he wanted to look at the game's pain settings again. But he knew they were set to the optimum levels. Vance returned with some packaged sliced meat and a bag of sliced bread. Not quite a sandwich, but Shaggy wasn't going to complain. The old were walked off with a sullen grunt and Shaggy munched away. Levi's response was so delayed that Shaggy had scarfed down 2 meat sandwiches before she answered. Shaggy even had to grunt to bring her back to the conversation. Huh? Oh, the fairy's house is fine. Shaggy wanted to slap his forehead, but he was afraid of hurting himself more. Not the fairy's house. Our house. Her mention of the little fairy brought his memory back to the wounded little thing. He wondered where it went. But apparently Levi had built the thing a home. He wondered if they needed a tiny doctor or something. But he shook off the thought. Levi knew what she was doing. Oh, we got all the wood sorted down here and I wanted to talk to you about designs. But then you went all big, bad, scary, demon wolf. Seriously, this is going to be a project. It shouldn't take away from our game time. But this is going to take some time. Mostly getting the grass to grow how I want it and get the trees arranged. Shaggy nodded as he felt his wounds begin to heal. Didn't take away the pain. But it helped. Sounds good. But the kids are set and the pack. We just need to get them some furniture. Although moving beds and end tables down here is going to be a pain. Maybe a portal? Again. I'd have to study how to do that. But I'm not made of magic. It's going to have to be the old-fashioned way. Great. You know, this was supposed to be about helping my legion get a foothold. Topside. Not setting up a grove for me and you. It can be both. Levy snarked. We just have to take things slow. No reason to rush. Besides, we are going to have to wake up soon. Work and the real world await. Shaggy grimaced as he tried to remember how long they'd been immersed. It was probably close to 8 hours of real time. Which meant they were going to have to get things squared away here. Shaggy grinned. That meant that the pack and the kids could steal their own damn furniture. They just had to be smart about it. But Levy disabused him of that notion. We should have the NPCs turtle up while we are gone, she said. Why? They can handle themselves and think about what they could get done. Levy finally turned away from the terminal and looked down at him. You've already caused a bunch of problems topside. Robbing K-Tech, a construction company, and a grocery chain. Better to lie low for a day, at least. When we come back, we can focus on getting things settled here. But while we're gone, we should have our people rest. Not to mention I've got a few of my witches coming. Shaggy grumbled, but he could see the logic. They were already in enemy territory, and he had gone and kicked more hornet nests. But having his pack laze around doing nothing seemed wasteful. Then his eye was drawn toward the surly old werewolf chewing on a large piece of what looked like ham. He grinned as he realized he could put his pack through the Vance School of Werewolf nonsense. That would give them something to do. Meanwhile, the kids could get comfortable. They'd also have to be wary of any scouts from the wild bunch. Shaggy sighed. They needed to arrange so much before they logged out. Which was probably why Levy had her face back in the terminal. He rose to his feet and gave her a quick peck on the cheek. I'll get the pack their orders. I figured. I'll try to get this thing to automate some of the grass growth. If we can come to an agreement on our cabin design before we log, the system can build it. Sounds good. Shaggy said as he started walking toward Vance. Also, we need to figure out the raid on Cog. We still haven't found him, but we need to be ready. Yes, dear. Shaggy said over his shoulder. Shaggy jogged over to his werewolf mentor and sat down. As he did, he felt his mouth drool at the smell of the raw ham. Blood dripped down the man's bare chest and Shaggy started as he realized they were both shirtless. Damn demon wolf. I ain't the sharing type. Vance rumbled as he took another large bite. No. But you are the teaching type. Levy and I have to handle some stuff. I was wondering if you could stick around and watch my pups. Vance swallowed roughly before replying. Why the hell would I do that? You lot are way more trouble than you're worth. I have stuff to do too, you know? Shaggy gave Vance his best disbelieving look. The old were shook his head and took another bite. He was ignored Shaggy for a few chews before he finally grumbling. Fine. I'll watch him. But when you get back, visit Wayne. Shaggy's face twisted in confusion before he remembered the leader of the biggest mutt pack in Austin. He needed to present himself to the dude. Shaggy sighed at another item being added to his list. But it needed to be done. Especially if he was going to wage war with another gang. He didn't need a pack of angry wurs on his ass, too. Shaggy nodded at Vance and rose to his feet. He brushed the dust off his pants, started back to Levy. As he did, he took in the tiny magical light above and the growing trees. Nearby, he could see the teens moving their meager possessions into the shabby-looking building they had the system build for them. Sybil and Seacrass were helping as Rita and Vic were getting their stolen loot sorted. Again, he didn't see Tom, but his pack link told him the lanky bastard was above him in the deli. Hopefully moving whatever else was up there down to the cave. They had accomplished a lot in a few days. Probably pissed off a fair number of people. Shaggy couldn't keep the smile off his face as he thought about pissing off even more when he and Levy logged back in. It was going to be a hell of a time. Shaggy thought he'd shoot a message to the others in Undertown while at work. He was willing to bet they were going to be jealous, and he really wanted to know how everything was going. He also hadn't heard from Obadiah since they dropped off the Jerusa stuff. With a final sigh, Shaggy arrived next to Levy and gave his distracted wife a side hug. They were going to do so much more when they came back, and Shaggy couldn't wait. Shaggy sighed as the motes of light dissipated around him. It had been a boring but productive day at work. One that left him tired but satisfied. Although the conversation he was having with Levy before they both got into their pods had worn on him a little. Not that he didn't agree. But after already spending so much money, and the things were notoriously tricky. A beam of light off to his left told him his wife had logged in right after him. "I am just saying it's a good idea," Levy said as soon as they made eye contact. Shaggy groaned, not wanting to carry on the conversation. "Please, Levy. Can we not talk about it in game? You're not getting away from it. We should buy a dual pod. I miss sleeping with you, and they have gotten much roomier. But they are still new. There are bound to be complications. If not with the hardware, then with the software. Not to mention, we just bought 2 brand new pods. It's an expense we don't need for a product we practically already own." Levy's nose scrunched up in annoyance. "We can afford it." "Yes, we can. But that doesn't mean we should buy it. We won't be able to afford much if we keep spending money like water." "We don't spend it like water. If anything, we are too frugal with our money. We can afford a few luxuries in the house. I'm not saying we go out and purchase an AG pool. But can we at least check the trade-in value on the solo pods and look at some dual pod prices?" Shaggy sighed. To be fair, he had been thinking about getting an anti-gravity pool installed. The things were super cool and supposedly a great workout. He shook the thought away as he looked into Levy's in-game face. In truth, it wasn't that far off from her real one. He must have been blind not to recognize her when they first met in-game. Heaving another giant sigh, Shaggy nodded. Levy snorted. "Pfft. I don't see why they wouldn't. Oh, this is going to be great. You'll see." Shaggy walked off toward the sounds of people. The trees seemed to be denser, and he even saw grass in spots. Although it was pretty spotty. Levy ran over and gripped his arm happily. They walked through the underground forest as Shaggy switched his brain into game mode. There was so much to focus on and accomplish. They needed to get furniture, start marching into bunch turf, check in with Obadiah, and even get his pack up to speed. That wasn't even including the guys in Undertown. He had contacted them while he was out of the game. The boys were doing fine. Ran had set up several trade deals. Mostly through the Brute clan. Dave was helping the random citizenry rebuild their shack houses. Vlad was doing his level best to harass the Quinnica at every turn. But the new space vampire lord had rolled into town and pulled a lot of the Quinnica off the streets. Even their shipping tunnels to the surface had been abandoned. A fact Ren and the Brute clan had taken advantage of. Slink was still at the Viper's Den, running the day-to-day operations with Petra and Ephemera. Although the boy said Chromia had been helping more and more. When Shaggy asked if Slink could have Ephemera meet him topside, the boy had gotten cagey. So much so that Shaggy wanted to check his loyalty levels. He was sure Ify was still his #1 henchman. Maybe the boy didn't want one of the 3 women helping him to run off. Whatever it was, Slink agreed to pass on the message, eventually. Which meant, hopefully soon, his #1 would be part of his pack. As Levy and Shaggy left the tree line and entered a path bracketed by trees, they saw more people. Several teens were moving boxes down the path toward where Shaggy was sure their home building was. He was about to ask them what was new when a pink orb ran straight at Levy. Even with Shaggy's reflex, he couldn't stop the tiny missile before it collided with Levy. But the tall drow woman didn't even blink as the orb stopped right in front of her. Once the pink ball stopped moving, it gained a more human shape. Shaggy was surprised to see the fairy they had rescued from Jerusa's place. She looked a little better, if still a little skinny. She was floating in front of Levy, jabbering in a language that neither of them recognized. Shaggy guessed it was Fae, and he started rolling his eyes at the thought of more stuff getting put on his to-do list. Hopefully, the little thing would just go on home, or ideally, Levy could handle that stuff. Seeing the looks of incomprehension on Levy and Shaggy's faces, the little fairy stomped a bare foot in the air. Shaggy noticed that someone, or maybe the fairy herself, had made a dress of leaves for her. He almost rolled his eyes at how trope-y that was. But a sudden flash of light above Levy's head stopped him. The pink light cascaded down his tall wife's frame and he thought he saw her shudder. Shaggy momentarily thought the thing was attacking, but then Levy got the faraway look of a player reading a notification. He paused and waited as the fairy started with her rapid-fire nonsense language again. Whoa, hold up, what do you mean, home? How am I supposed to do that? Levy asked the fairy, suddenly aggrieved. The fairy made her squeaky noises again before Levy responded. Well, I don't have a portal to Fae on my person. Huh? Shaggy had to cover his ears as a shrill cry went up from the fairy. Oh. I'm sorry. Pixies. What's the difference? The apparent pixie, still looking affronted, went on a long diatribe about the differences. One Shaggy was sure was interesting. But he didn't need to be a part of. He gave Levy a short wave before he continued down the path. If he was lucky, all the kids and his pack would be hanging around their new homes. Such as they were. As he approached, he heard even louder cheers and groans coming from beyond the trees. He was really surprised at how fast they had grown. Levy had explained that the magic of Jerusa's crystal thing would make things grow quicker. But it was impressive. More so when he saw bigger and bigger stretches of grass appearing. It was like the stuff was spreading from the center of the grove and heading out toward the walls. Which, if he knew his wife, was probably what was happening. She had asked him to grab more plants, though, which he would certainly pass along. But really, he wanted to run and hunt some more. He was eager to get into it with the Wild Bunch gang. It would be fun and something he could brag to the rest of the guys in the Legion. A loud roar brought his attention back around to where he was walking. As he came to the end of the path, he saw his and Levy's half-constructed log cabin. Flanked on either side was the pack's house and the extensive building the teens were crashing. But most people were in front of the pack's squat building. They seemed to be watching something and cheering. Shaggy checked the pack link, hoping no one was in a fight. But all he got back was tired elation and some bloodlust. Shaggy increased his speed and even pushed a few teens to the side to see what the kids were cheering about. Vance was standing in the center of the ring of people. He had a foot on Seacrest's chest as Rita and Tom flanked him on either side. Sybil and Vic were rotating around Vance, peppering the old man with bullets and green demon fire. None of them seemed to notice Shaggy, but he felt the others acknowledge his presence mentally. He gave them a mental wave back and sat back to enjoy the show. But Vance snapped his head up as he kicked Seacrest across the dirt ring. Several teens dove out of the way as the lizard went sailing. There were several loud thuds as Seacrest rolled through the ground before coming to a stop. Get in here, Alpha. Vance growled as Tom and Rita jumped in and out of his range taking swiping with their weapons. Shaggy wondered where Tom had gotten the slim dagger he was using. But he put it aside. The lanky werewolf had always been shifty. Shaggy shrugged and pounced forward just as Rita backstepped out of Vance's range. He didn't grow his claws, as he wanted the old were to be in fighting shape when they went after the bunch. As he sailed toward his target, arm outstretched in a Superman punch, he sent a mental tug for Tom to dash in when Vance moved. But the old were tensed with his muscle as Shaggy's fist slammed into his chest. Vance took the punch and then moved to grab Shaggy's arm, but bent his arm out of the way and went for a left cross that Vance dodged. The older man moved his head backward and Tom lunged from the side at the move, aiming for Vance's torso. Vance reacted by turning and grabbing Tom's arm and swinging him towards Shaggy. Thanks to his reflexes, Shaggy ducked out of the way as Tom went sailing. Shaggy ignored the loud noise Tom made as he hit the ground. He went in again, this time growing his claws and slashing them in an X as Vance backed up. But a small orb of green fire slammed into the wolf's back as well as several rounds from Vic's rifle. The older were grunted as the blast hit him, but kept back away from Shaggy. Shaggy sent Rita a message through their link and shifted his hands back to normal. Vance raised an eyebrow at the move but moved to re-engage in a fistfight. But Shaggy slid to his knees and gripped Vance around the hips. Shaggy squeezed as hard as he could and lifted. Even with his considerable strength, the older were was heavy. But Shaggy got him off the ground as more fire and bullets slammed into Vance. Vance's fist rained down on Shaggy as he held him and Shaggy did his best to weather through it. But the man's fists were like cinder blocks. "Any time now," Shaggy shouted. Rita and Tom appeared on either side of Vance and slashed at his arms. Rita's sword left a huge gash on the man's right arm as Tom's dagger embedded itself in the opposite one. Vance held an annoyance and swiped at them. But with Shaggy holding him up, he could only flail ineffectually. Shaggy grinned up at Vance, but the old were smiled back. Shaggy thought that Vance was proud of Shaggy's pack, but then his pale arms became furry. Shaggy swore as Vance completed a partial shift. Vance's arms grew longer, and long black claws shimmered in the light. Shaggy was about to let go when another tug on his pack link made him smile. Vance looked a little confused as he stabbed both of his claws down into Shaggy's shoulder. It hurt like hell and Shaggy could feel the sadistic bastard twisting the claws around. But what was coming was going to be significantly better. Tom and Rita stopped cutting Vance's arms just as Shaggy raised him as high as he could. Vance was so concerned with Shaggy that he didn't see the incoming 7-foot lizard. Seacrest came running from the side. Arm held out in a running clothesline that caught Vance's right across the face. Shaggy let go and growled as Vance's claws were ripped out of his skin. Shaggy felt his skin heal back together as Sybil and Vic kept up a steady stream of fire. Vance rolled a short distance before popping up to his feet and giving them a feral grin. It seemed he was about to wolf out completely when something occurred to him. Spitting blood from his mouth, he growled, "Y'all win." The cheering teens got louder as Shaggy felt his pack give equal sounds of happiness and exhaustion. He didn't know how long they'd been at this. But from the way the others felt over the link he was willing to bet a while. Rita shook her head at him. "Not really that long. But he has hooped us every time before you got here. We almost had him." "Sure. Gun's almost out of bullets and your little pig sticker barely bothers him. But yeah, we were so close." Fire was working. Least it seemed to bug him more than bullets. Silver didn't seem to do jack all, though. Shaggy scoffed at the praise, but Vance's stern look made him keep his mouth shut. "You were better coordinated, and you all seemed to fight that much quicker. I was ready to go full wolf to take you all down." Which was the win condition? Rita added for Shaggy's benefit. He nodded as Vance spoke to his pack about their failings and triumphs in the spar. Shaggy could see food trade hands as annoyed and happy-looking teens settled bets. He smiled. At least they were having fun. Shaggy hoped that whatever his pack learned was going to be helpful from now on when they hit the bunch. That thought seemed to spark something in Rita, but he couldn't get a handle on what it was. When she turned to address him, the older woman looked like she had swallowed a lemon whole. "We got a request to parley from the bunch." As the rest of his pack went silent, Shaggy stood there, stunned for a few seconds. Vance cackled at the look that must have appeared on Shaggy's face. He had been planning on attacking the bunch all over the streets. Get his kids some weapons, his wife some plants, and maybe find some interesting loot along the way. He grumbled as he asked for details. They want to meet you at a neutral location. It's some warehouse just further west of here. Out near where those old ranches are. Tom added. You can bring 2 guards, but everyone must go unarmed. Rita said. So this is an obvious trap, right? Shaggy said, trying not to sound hopeful. Rita and Vic shrugged. They spoke to one of the kids that was on watch. They made themselves known and were polite enough. But something smells, boss. That could just be your paranoia, Vic. Don't mean I'm wrong, Mama Rita. Rita's face went red at the nickname and the other members of his pack started laughing. Shaggy was sure there was a story there, but he was more concerned with the meeting. While he could go and probably handle an ambush, there was always a chance it was legit. But he couldn't think what the talks would include. Turf agreements? Ceasefire? Maybe an information exchange? In the end, he was going to have to talk about it with Levy. Don't forget Wayne. Vance said as he took a fresh shirt from a nearby teen. The kid was holding a plastic bag of 3 white shirts. Shaggy looked down at his own torn t-shirt and raised a hand. He gave the kid a quick thanks and looked questioningly at the others. They all seemed to pick up his question at the same time, but it was Rita who answered him. Mart had a bunch of random stuff on some of those pallets we grabbed. Got a microwave and some toiletries. Even some random clothes. But we also got enough food to last us a while. But we are going to need a fridge or a large icebox. Maybe a generator. Yeah, boss. The magical nightlight in the sky is nice and all, but some natural light would be good in here. Shaggy groaned. Put it on the list. Rita and the others can handle all of that while I'm off getting ambushed. The others grinned at his flippancy, but Sybil raised a question. We stealing, or should we just buy some stuff? Shaggy tamped down his immediate response. Which was to steal it. They still needed to maintain a low profile. At least a bit. They had collected a few credits from the various bunch members they had killed, not to mention Jeruz's house. The credits for the spooks missions were being funneled back to Undertown. But they had enough for a few things. Biting his lip, he said. Buy it. Keep a low profile, but take the kids out and have a day. If the bunch want to pretend all is well, they'll leave you alone. If they don't? Vic asked. Shaggy gave his sharpshooter a feral grin before he turned to find Levy. But his wife was already nearby, talking to a few of the teens. The pixie was standing on her shoulder, looking down her tiny nose at everyone. When the little thing caught Shaggy's eye, he was sure he saw her snort in derision. Shaggy frowned, but approached Levy. As she finished speaking to the teens, she smiled at him. Oh good. I have a new quest. I have to get this little one back to the Fey realm. Shaggy groaned audible again. Fine. We can put that on the list too. When do we need to go? Levy's smile fell as the pixie chattered on at her shoulder. Well you can't go. Say what now? Non-magical worse aren't really welcome. Hell, it seems the magical ones aren't liked much either. But this is something I have to do myself. It shouldn't take long. She just needs to go back and inform the council that K-Tech is abducting fake creatures and keeping them here against their will. The tiny pixie started shrieking angrily, but Shaggy ignored her as he nodded at Vance. Oh, it's true. Saw it with my own eyes, and I'm willing to bet the evidence was passed on to the right parties on this side. Unless I severely misjudged Obadiah. Huh. Told ya he smelled like government. If that old cyborg's involved, I'm willing to bet a whole bunch of red tape is going to get thrown at Austin. Soon the streets will be crawling with G-men and their little black suits. Mark my words. Sounds fun. Shaggy sighed. Well, either way. I have to meet the leader of the wild bunch for a parley. Then it's off to the head werewolf in charge. For the mutts in Austin. Vance amended. Then it's some home living improvements around here. But if the first meeting goes the way I think it will, we're heading for a gang war. Which should be fun. Plus, none of the other guys have started one yet. I mean, we were skirmishing with the Quinnica, but nothing full on. Levy narrowed her eyes at him. Who you taking for the meetings? Shaggy shrugged. Seacrass and Vic for the first one and the entire pack for the second? I mean, I figured I had to present my whole pack. What about you? Is Faye safe? Of course not. Levy said as the pixie snorted. Shaggy really wanted to flick the little pink punk. But I'll call some of my girls and we'll make a day of it. A nice little trip into the land of fairy. While you and your pups can have your gang war. Be back soon? Shaggy asked as he raised himself up and kissed her. You know it. You aren't escaping me that easy. Go have fun. Shaggy grinned as he nodded. You too. Turning to his pack and Vance, who had all been listening, Shaggy grinned. So, time to go see what a bunch of animals want to talk about. Why me? Seacrass asked as they crossed a large dirt field. Shaggy shrugged and looked ahead to the only intact building ahead of him. It was an old warehouse. It was surrounded by empty lots that looked like they had held buildings at one point. But now they all sat empty, save for some random detritus and sparse sections of grass. They had entered a section of Austin that apparently had seen hell. Either from normal neglect or Cog's attack, Shaggy wasn't sure. He turned to look at the closest buildings surrounding the warehouse. He wondered if Vic had gotten set up with his rifle yet. You're the toughest one in the pack, Seacrass. Well, other than me. Shaggy finally answered as he checked the rooftops in sight. Seacrass grunted an acknowledgement and Shaggy was sure the lizard man was flexing his chest muscle. Shaggy wondered if the dude ever wore a shirt. Seacrass scales probably counted as armor, especially after the werewolf change, so a shirt was probably useless. It would just get cut up and leave him half naked, anyway. Shaggy started as he realized he was the same way. He sighed as he thought about the number of clothes his new pack of werewolves was going to go through. They were going to have to hit up some stores. Maybe he could carry a backpack or something. Shaggy snapped his head back around. Seacrass had picked up on movement ahead and the emotion over the pack link alerted Shaggy. He sent a mental command to Vic to be alert and continued moving toward the warehouse. If they were lucky, they could get the bunch talking outside of the building. Otherwise, Vic was going to be useless. Shaggy sent another mental command for Seacrass to be ready to slow down as they got to the large rusted metal door. The warehouse was decrepit. Pieces of the brickwork were falling off and several windows were broken. Shaggy noted that two large windows looked down at him and Seacrass. Perfect spots for ambushers to hide. As they stopped, the large white roll-up door to the warehouse moved and Shaggy felt Seacrass tense. Shaggy himself was oddly calm. Whatever was going to go down was going to go down. He was sure they could get out of it. The loud creaking sound of the metal door rising gave Shaggy enough time to mutter to Seacrass. If shit goes sideways, and we get separated, meet back at the deli. We won't be separated. Seacrass responded simply. Shaggy looked at the tense 7-foot-tall alien and shrugged. The guy was a beast and seemed ready to throw down. He briefly thought he should have brought someone cooler-headed. But it was too late now. The metal door was halfway up and Shaggy could already see 6 pairs of feet. Someone hadn't obeyed the rules of the parley. What a surprise. Shaggy doubted any Wild Bunch leadership was even in the warehouse. Shaggy got a mental ping from Vic, letting him know he was set, and grinned. The door finally completed its journey and Shaggy was face to face with 6 animal humans. He didn't know if they were aliens or not, but with the way they were looking at him, he was sure they were enemies. They were all wearing loose-fitting jeans and baggy shirts. Shaggy was sure he saw some weapons hidden stuff in waistbands and behind backs. Shaggy even got the sharp tang of fear in his nostrils. It wasn't everywhere, but these boys were nervous. The two groups stood facing each other and Shaggy could feel Seacrass getting annoyed. He was about to kick everything off when one of the bunch, a human-looking man with white skin and brown ram horns, moved forward. Ahem, this is a parley to, like, tell you guys to leave our turf. Or, like, we'll be forced to kill all of you. Shaggy snorted. Okay, you need to look up what parley means. Because what you just delivered was an ultimatum. One I do not accept. The 6 gangsters shared looks, before the ram man spoke up again. So you will not be accepting our generous offer? Nope. Shaggy said, smiling. And are you the one known as Shaggy? Ram asked. That brought Shaggy up short. He wasn't sure if he had ever said his name around any of the bunch. But maybe one of the kids squealed on him. Then again, few of the teens had even left the cave. They were a loyal bunch, all things considered. Seeing his look of confusion, all 6 of the bunch thugs laughed. Shaggy felt Vic and Seacrest tense up even farther. Don't be, like, surprised. Our network is far and wide. We got rats in many places. But mostly underground. Y'all are in Undertown? Shaggy asked, latching on to the way the man said underground. Pfft. Please, we don't need to be. We have people. Shaggy made the connection, just as a few other thugs cackled. The freaks? We have a mutually beneficial arrangement. Shaggy screamed suddenly, but not at what the ram had said. He had just gotten a notification, and it had pissed him off. But that anger was enough for both Vic and Seacrest to spring into action. One moment Seacrest's enormous frame was right next to him and the next it was gone. The large lizard had pounced, clearing 15 feet, and landed right in front of the still chuckling ram. Vic had opened fire with his K-Tech laser rifle and Shaggy had to close the notification window before he dashed in, too. This won't take long, Shaggy thought as he saw the looks of surprise on all of their faces. He was grinning when a blue arc of electricity lurched out of the warehouse's upstairs window. It slammed into his chest and sent him skidding and rolling back into the dirt. As he felt his flesh melding back together, he remembered the weird-ass laser cannons the freaks had. It didn't hit as hard as he remembered, but the damn thing still stung. Boss? Seacrest yelled as he flung the ram thug through the warehouse wall. Shaggy sent his pack calming vibes as he dodged another blue blast. Alternating shots were coming from both windows of the warehouse. Seacrest was busy tearing into the few thugs below, so Shaggy grew his claws and charged again. He saw Seacrest rip the tentacles off another thug and boot a cat person into the dirt. Shaggy gave himself a mental pat on the back. He had brought the right people. An energy beam from Vic's rifle zoomed over Shaggy's shoulder and smacked a pig-headed thug on the side. Shaggy ignored the smell of burnt pork as he launched himself at the warehouse wall. The 2 electric blasts from the window stopped as he got closer. Shaggy hoped they weren't retreating. But he put that thought to the side as he clawed his way up the wall toward the windows. Both windows had been blown out from the force of the electrical cannon. So all Shaggy had to do was swing himself in. Seacrest gave a roar below him, followed by a wet squelching noise. Shaggy hoped his largest pack member wasn't eating anyone. But he had also taken a chunk or 2 out of people. So who? Was he to judge? Shaggy landed on a slim metal platform overlooking the warehouse. The warehouse itself was empty. Wide-open gray cement floors met his eyes as he peered over the edge of the walkway he was on. Even the upper walkways were clear as they ran the length of the warehouse on either side of him. Shaggy followed the elevated walkways with his eyes until he spotted another platform, like the one he was standing on at the back of the warehouse. That is when another electric shot sped toward him. Shaggy ducked as he heard another blast go off. Seacrest gave a surprised yowl and Shaggy heard a loud thud. He quickly checked the pack link to see how his friend was doing. But Seacrest gave him the all clear. The big alien was in pain, but alive. Shaggy stayed low as he hurried toward the connecting walkway. But as he peered around, another electric blast shot by him. He had to drag his head back under cover as the cannon continued firing. Shaggy grit his teeth. He was going to have to rush them down a straight walkway. Probably getting pelted the entire time. The damn things had a lot of knockback to them, but maybe if he was fast. A sudden mental tug from Vic made Shaggy smile. The sharpshooter was currently moving to get a better shot. He was going to need to use the link to find his targets in the warehouse. But it was a hell of a lot safer. Shaggy gave a mental nod to the idea and signaled Seacrest to keep the shooter's attention. Shaggy would do his part. He peered over the railing of the walkway toward the shooters. But he had to duck again. He didn't remember those damn cannon firing so fast. Both shooters were on an opposite platform on the far side of the warehouse. Shaggy thought he could see matching windows to the ones at the front of the warehouse. If he had to guess, both ends of the warehouse were similar. Which meant if his sharpshooter was good, he could line up a shot through the window. And Vic was very good. Banging and roaring from below brought Shaggy's mind back to Seacrest. He helped by popping up and back down, drawing as much fire as he could while also trying to get a good mental image of the shooters. He gave a shout to Seacrest, pretending to reveal their plans. Keep it up. They can't keep firing forever. They'll run out of ammo at some time. He felt a mental grin from Seacrest as he dodged another wide electric beam. A cackling laugh from the other side of the warehouse echoed toward him. Ha 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 ha. These don't have ammo, dumbass. But keep jumping up and down like a jackrabbit with a stick in its ass. I'll get you, eventually. Shaggy rolled his eyes as a second laugh joined the first. He was about to engage the dumbass duo in banter when a loud crash sounded from opposite him. Shaggy felt Vic's smug triumph as a brief shout went up. He gave Seacrest the signal to charge. They probably wouldn't make it before Vic got another shot off, but better safe than sorry. Shaggy pelted down the metal walkway as Seacrest sprinted across the warehouse floor. Another grunt echoed throughout the warehouse as Shaggy was halfway to his goal. Vic felt smug and happy as Shaggy stepped off the walkway onto the platform. Seacrest leapt from the floor of the warehouse up to the platform, and they both started searching for the shooters. 2 bodies lay in a pile of glass. Vic's shots had exploded the window and even melted some of the metal platform. Shaggy kicked over one thug and checked to see if he was dead. The gray-skinned thug had a face full of red scales and his eyes were wide in shock. Vic's shot had hit center mass and burned straight through the gangster. Seacrest checked the other one. Shaggy wasn't sure what kind of animal the other one was, but they looked hairy. Seacrest didn't bother with checking for a pulse, instead the big lizard jammed his claws into the furry person's neck. Shaggy shrugged and did the same to the red-scaled guy. That done, both he and Seacrest grabbed the large blocky metal cannons. Shaggy was sure he heard the things bubble and slosh as they were moved. But he ignored it as he checked over his gun for damage. He didn't see any, but he wanted to be careful. Seacrest didn't check his, instead he handed it to Shaggy to check. Shaggy sighed and looked over the second cannon. The pair reminded Shaggy of old rocket launchers with a large circular hole at one end. Besides, from the silver metal and random bits of wiring, they looked like heavy ordnance. Heavy ordnance he and Seacrest had been shot within the chest. Shaggy glanced at his lizard pal to see Seacrest's normal scales burnt and broken. He even had bits of pink showing underneath his scales. Shaggy looked down and found even he was still healing. The damn things burned like hell and took a while to patch up. Shaggy grinned. They could either sell the things or use them for home defense. I'd be all for the home defense route, shouted Vic from the warehouse floor. The sharpshooter must have rushed over after taking out the last of the bunch. Shaggy waved at Vic and started toward a nearby ladder. Seacrest wasn't as patient and flung himself over the side and landed with a meaty thud. Shaggy even saw cracks form where the big lizard landed. Seacrest was handing over his cannon to Vic as Shaggy joined them. The meeting had gone exactly as he knew it would. Although the freak connection was an interesting angle. But apparently they weren't the same gang. Probably just had similar ideologies. He shook it off. He'd tell the guys about it later. For now, they needed to head back home. Vic and Seacrest nodded at his thought. But the sharpshooter raised a question. What the hell did they say to set you off, boss? 1 minute, you were cool as a cucumber. The next you were pissed. The sudden anger sparked both of us off. The sharpshooter waved between himself and Seacrass, and Shaggy nodded. He had been surprised by a notification from the system. It really wasn't all that surprising when he thought about it. But he had really wanted to be the first one to start a gang war. But apparently, someone else had beaten him to it. Notification. Your legion has elected to go to war with another faction, the Quinnica. As your legion is a committee, you must vote on whether you agree to go to war. Once a gang war is started, both forces will attack each other on sight, while also actively invade each other's territory. The gang war will continue until one side is the victor or peace is agreed to. Please check the terminal for further information. Go to war? Yes/no/abstain. Shaggy held on to the door handle as Sybil took a hard left turn. Even though they were deep in downtown Austin and no one was chasing them, she still drove like a maniac. Their brown sedan shifted back in the opposite direction and Shaggy grunted. He heard similar sounds from the back seat. Shaggy felt his pack's annoyance and anger. Do you have to drive like you're running away from something? Tom asked, sounding miffed. We stole it, so that's how I drive it, Sybil said as she overtook a slow-moving truck. Vic grunted and scrunched closer to Seacrass. No one knows we stole it. So, could you slow down? And how about next time we get a damn car that can fit all of us? This crowding into the backseat shit is getting old. Shaggy agreed with Rita and made his stance known over the pack link. Even with him in the front seat, the whole car still felt stifling. That also was because of the pack link tripling his own annoyance at the situation. Seacrass didn't seem to mind the cramped conditions. At least through the link. Sybil didn't respond with words, but she slowed down and stopped overtaking every other car in the street. After returning to the cave and dumping off the electric cannons, Shaggy and his pack had set out to meet Wayne. According to Vance, the leader of the mongrels held court in a fancy bar in the middle of downtown. According to the old were, it was one of those bars more concerned with looking pretty than serving booze. Although that could have just been Vance's irritation peeking through. With Levy off to meet her magic friends and Shaggy's meeting with Wayne, the old man had to play babysitter. Something he did not appreciate. Which Shaggy understood, but the way the kids were eyeing the electric cannons made him nervous. After some arguing and favors promised, they convinced Vance to stay. Then it was just a quick trip topside and another hot wire from their resident car thief. Sybil had found and grabbed a car pretty quickly. Shaggy wondered if she had a skill or something that made it easier, or if the game itself was putting cars in their path. But he brushed it off, mostly because he started fearing for his digital life with the way Sybil was driving. Afternoon traffic was already almost bumper to bumper. Even with the flying cars. But Sybil seemed able and willing to get dangerously close to both pedestrians and other cars. It had been so bad that Shaggy was waiting for a drone to chase them down. But, again, the highest concentration of drones seemed to be elsewhere in the city. A few zoomed along the skyways, clearly on their way toward one disaster or another. In fact, the largest problem they were having with getting to their destination was other players. There always seemed to be some soup fighting off a raging beast or some flying jackass chasing an armored car. It didn't surprise him that so many players were out saving the day, but the sheer frequency was alarming. How many bank robberies can happen in one day? Let alone a 5-block radius. The whole thing smacked of the system, creating problems for the players to solve. Shaggy was sure none of the problems were being caused by villain players. At least he hoped so. What kind of idiot would rob a bank in the middle of downtown Austin? No player would. Try that. Well, maybe a few would. Clout was a hell of a thing. Shaggy was thinking about it too until he watched a flying soup dive bomb a runaway safe. The big metal thing had grown legs and was literally running. Behind it was a masked man in a painter's smock rapidly drawing shapes in the air. The shapes formed into random cartoon characters and started defending the painter while he tried to get away. The whole bizarre scene had played out a few cars ahead of them as Sybil cursed up a storm. That wasn't even the craziest incident from their short drive. Shaggy's thoughts came back to the present as Sybil wrenched the car off the road and into an alley. It was a tight space between two large office buildings, and Shaggy was sure not a place for a car. But Sybil slammed on the brakes and turned off the engine. Shaggy glanced around, looking for their destination. Not finding it, he turned to Sybil, who was getting out of the car. He said. Behind us, boss. Across the street and down the stairs. Vic said as he shifted out of the back seat. Shaggy turned and saw a large black sign embedded in a red brick wall. Stairs angled downward and into the ground right beneath the sign. He noted that the side of the building and the sidewalk were free of trash and graffiti. It was a nice little metropolitan bar in a safe location that a standard businessman might frequent on a lunch break. It was also picturesque that it made the hairs on Shaggy's neck stand on end. He didn't know what he didn't like about the place, but it felt off somehow. Shaggy briefly wondered if it was some kind of magic or spell. But if it was, he didn't know the purpose. Judging by the people heading down the stairs for lunch, it wasn't a keep-away spell. Also, since he could see the place, it wasn't an illusion trap or something. Shaggy swallowed his nerves and followed his pack out of the car. Seacrest and Rita waited through the busy street as Vic and Sybil waited for Shaggy. He had once again lost sight of Tom, but a feeling of elation and smugness brought his vision to across the street. The slippery bastard was already across and running down the stairs. Shaggy growled and sent the equivalent of a psychic leash pull to Tom. Even with all the cars and random noise of the city, Shaggy heard the lanky man yelp, and he had to smile. He felt the others grin as well as he lazily made his way across the street. Sirens wailed in the distance and drones buzzed overhead. But Shaggy and his crew kept their heads down until they climbed down the stairs. The short staircase ended in a sharp right turn and a large glass door. Tom was latched onto the door, looking like a spoiled kid who didn't get dessert. Shaggy shook his head as he pushed Tom out of the way and opened the door. A hand on his shoulder stopped him, though. "Boss, Seacrest, or I should go through first." Shaggy smiled at Rita's intention, but shook his head. "Nope, we need to show strength. Not fear. So we lead with the big dog up front. We ain't here for a fight. So if they ask us to disarm, we do, and we play by the rules." "What if they don't?" Vic asked. Shaggy smiled, but said nothing. He knew they knew what to do if shit got dicey. But Shaggy wasn't expecting things to go sideways. Vance had said these people were legit, so they just needed to be polite and get this over with. He had a war to wage. With both the Wild Bunch and the Quinnica, apparently. Shaggy shoved the Quinnica problem to the back of his mind. He had agreed to the gang war, but he and his pack would not be too useful topside. It wasn't something worth thinking about. He wrenched the glass door open, revealing a big red door with the bar's name on it in some fancy letters. As he entered, he heard Tom ask, "What does Chaperon Rouge mean, anyway?" "It's French, I think." Rita answered. "Okay, but what does it mean?" "I don't know." "What does it matter?" "Rouge is makeup, right?" Sybil asked. "So the bar is named Makeup Supervisor," said Vic. "What?" His pack continued trying to decipher the bar's name as he entered a wide hall. On the left-hand side were several large booths and tables. To the right was the bar running the entire length of the room. Several people were behind serving drinks to customers. The bar wasn't packed, but it had a fair few people in it. The fact he didn't smell food meant that the place was strictly alcohol and pretzels kind of place. At the far end, opposite them, sat a large stage slightly raised from the floor. But it was empty, with just a piano gracing its right side. Shaggy took another large whiff of the air. But the mix of people, smoke, and some odd perfume filled his nostrils. Again, his hackles were raised, but he quashed them as a furry man approached. As he did, Shaggy got a good look at the person. It was a bipedal rabbit in a black and red suit. He had a brown furry face with long brown white ears and an even twitching nose. Shaggy raised an eyebrow at the alien's buck teeth that protruded beneath its pink nose, but said nothing. "My employer informs me you are here for him?" said the rabbit, his teeth tainting his speech. "Depends who your employer is. I was told to meet him here. Although we didn't have a set meeting." "No. I suppose you wouldn't." None of the recent arrivals seemed capable of picking up a phone and arranging a meeting. Shaggy noted the subtle expression of distaste on the rabbit's face. His whisker twitched and his nose scrunched together. But the rabbit in a suit seemed to collect himself. Straightening the lines of his suit jacket, he waved a hand toward the back of the room. "Mr. Chasser is holding court in a room at the back. Please make your way there, but don't enter until I give the okay. Is that clear?" Shaggy felt his pack tense at the rabbit's tone. But he nodded amicably and followed the rabbit toward the back. He noted that the rabbit person didn't hop. Indeed, their guide seemed to take great pains to lift and move his furry feet. They said nothing as they crossed the bar. Businessmen and daytime drunks gave them a few side looks, but kept to themselves. As they passed the stage and entered a back room, Shaggy's senses went haywire. He briefly thought he was under attack. His hearing and sense of smell were inundated with noise and horrible smells. It was like he was overloaded. He heard the loud sound of a click and a sharp ting before the sensation stopped and he came back to himself. When he did, he saw the rabbit apologizing rapidly to an irate Rita. She had her sword to the rabbit's throat as Vic covered her with a pistol he had pulled from somewhere. Sybil's hand was on fire and Seacrass was standing next to Shaggy, looking worried. "I am terribly sorry. I was unaware that Mr. Chasser had activated the deterrent. Please, it is not my fault. IHRGK." Shaggy had to give Rita a mental tug to stop her from killing the rabbit man. The whole fiasco had been uncomfortable, but he had survived worse. But it brought up an interesting weakness Shaggy hadn't thought of. His senses could be too good sometimes. He was wondering how to fix the problem when the large double doors at the end of the hallway opened. Two large men were dragging a similar-sized man out the door and toward them. His pack readied themselves for a fight, but he pulled them back as the two large men stopped. Shaggy immediately identified them as Wers. He wasn't sure how. It was something in the way they moved and how they processed Rita and the others. Like two wolves sizing up a threat. Shaggy moved in front of Rita, head still ringing slightly. He had to physically push her back before she finally relented and slammed her sword back into its scabbard. The sound of metal scratching leather told him Vic had put away his weapon, too. Their guide's voice spoke up behind Shaggy as the two groups watched each other. "This is my fault. All my fault. I didn't know the deterrent was on. I take it the last meeting wasn't productive, Frederick?" The bigger of the two men nodded and Shaggy saw earplugs dangle from his ears. "Yes, Mr. Zargus. Our Alpha had to deploy the deterrent again." This one didn't seem to understand the position he was in. The two Wers lifted the third man between them and Shaggy saw that he was beaten pretty badly. It was all healing quickly. But neither of the guards seemed worried. The rabbit, Zargus, hesitated before moving past Shaggy and Rita. Once he was in front, he put his back to the wall of the hallway and waved toward Frederick and the other guard. "Ah, well, you can dump him outside. I'll make the arrangements for everything else." "Am I to assume Mr. Chasser is free, then?" "Yes, Mr. Zargus," both guards said as they started forward. Shaggy gave a mental order for his pack to make way. He got a little pushback from Rita, but eventually they all split. Seacrass even held the door open for them. As the two big men went by, Shaggy could hear the beaten were muttering loudly. "Stupid NPCs, don't realize who I..." The player's yammering tapered off as he was dragged out of the hallway. Shaggy nodded slowly. If there was one group of people that would try to make an end run at a strong NPC, it was gamers. A lot of them assumed that the quickest route to power was to kill a powerful NPC. It sometimes worked. But in this case, Shaggy was sure the player had just screwed themselves. The way Vance talked, this Wayne guy was in charge of a huge number of the Therianthropes. You attack a king in the middle of his kingdom and miss? You are going to want to run as far from that kingdom as possible. Shaggy cleared his mind as he followed Zargus toward the end of the hall. Wayne's guards had left the doors open and their rabbit guide stuck his head in before waving them through. Shaggy and the others followed inside and gawked slightly at what they were seeing. Shaggy had been expecting an office space, and instead, the room they were in was closer to a mead hall. There was even a fire pit in the center of the room. On their side of the fire pit was a large pool of red blood seeping into the hardwood floors. On the opposite side was a large wooden chair that Shaggy would have called a throne if it weren't for the complete lack of frills. To either side of the fire pit were long wooden tables with wers of all sizes seated, gazing at them. The room felt tense, probably because of what had just occurred. But the large man standing beside the throne was smiling widely as he spotted them. Wayne was over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and a large black beard that covered his neck. He was dressed casually in a black shirt with some band logo on it and stained blue jeans. He had a calm air about him, but Shaggy was sure that Wayne was annoyed, even if he hid it well enough. But if Shaggy had to deal with a bunch of upstart players all the time, he'd have a headache too. Silence filled the room as Zargus moved aside. Shaggy and Wayne sized each other up for a short while. But each said nothing. Shaggy was sure that he was being evaluated and measured against every other word that had passed through the bar. He maintained an air of detachment as he shook off the lingering effects of Wayne's deterrent. After several minutes in silence, and with his pack getting more and more anxious, Shaggy finally decided to say something. "So do I bow, or is the wooden throne for show?" The air in the room went still, and Shaggy saw Wayne's eyes narrow. Several people shifted in their seats as Rita's hand inched toward her sword. Shaggy maintained his cool and watched Wayne. The smile was still plastered on his face, and Shaggy was sure it was a facade. But he couldn't get a read on the man beneath. It was a tense few seconds before Wayne burst into a boisterous laugh. "Haha. No. Huh. You don't have he to ha bow." His words came out in a wheeze, and Shaggy felt the tense air dissipate. His pack was still on alert. But with Wayne cackling like an idiot, Shaggy wasn't worried. It took a while for Wayne to collect himself, but once he did, he walked around the center fire pit and stuck out a hand to Shaggy. Shaggy gripped the hand and gave it a vigorous shake, not lowering his eyes from Wayne's. Wayne maintained his grin until the handshake was dropped. "So you are one of the new ones, huh? One of the few who came in with a pack, too." Shaggy nodded back toward the others. "I was told too. Is that not the norm?" "Depends. Some think they can hide their numbers from me. Others legitimately don't have a pack. You are one of the few to follow the directions of whatever wandering trainer advised you to seek me out. Well, I figured it was a good idea. One way or the other." "A fair assumption." Zargus' voice broke the two out of their conversation. "Mr. Chasseur." Wayne and Shaggy followed the voice to a nearby table. Zargus was standing near the end, laying a tan map down. The were at the table grumbled, but picked up their food and drinks and moved. Wayne chuckled and led Shaggy over by an arm. Shaggy could feel Rita's displeasure, but he sent her calming waves. Once this was done, they could get out of here. "So," Wayne said, gesturing to the map. "First, we have to figure out where you and your pack are running. Once that's done, I can explain the politic structure of your hunting grounds." Wayne made air quotes around the words political structure and given the snorts coming from nearby tables. He could tell some of the wers weren't fans. Shaggy studied the map of Austin for a short time. There were the standards districts of Austin, but there were also large sections colored with different names on them. He assumed they were other wers. Judging by the size and locations of the areas, there were many wers in Austin. Mostly outside the city center, but there were even a few there as well. Shaggy found where their underground cavern was on the map, but he didn't want to point right at it. Something must have shown on his face, because Wayne cackled again. Haha. It doesn't have to be exact. Just give us a broad idea of where you've set up shop. Shaggy nodded before pointing to a spot directly between Rosedale and Brentwood. It wasn't exactly where they were, but it was close enough. Wayne's face tightened, and he stopped smiling. Shaggy figured he knew what the issue was, but he wanted Wayne to say it. That's Wild Bunch turf. We've noticed. Shaggy said simply. You know, George is a rough man. Keeps that area under his thumb pretty well. We've been doing okay so far. Wayne snapped his fingers in realization. You're the ones that hit their drug house? Shaggy merely grinned and Wayne fell into laughter again. Zargus rolled the map back up and some of them were moved back into place. Wayne clutched his stomach and gave Shaggy a heavy pat on the back. Something told Shaggy that if George was to disappear, the smiling Wayne wouldn't give a shit. You got brass ones for being such a small pack. But I'd watch out for the bunch. Most of them are animal supremacist. George isn't, but that doesn't stop him from taking advantage of his people's zealotry. Not to mention with his underground connection, he can get hold of some pretty neat hardware. Shaggy nodded. Yeah. I've noticed the connection. Wayne raised an eyebrow. But put a hand up like it wasn't his problem. You're far enough out of most territories that whatever you've got planned won't affect anyone. Most? I think there was a war bear and a war lion out that way. But they mostly stuck to themselves. The purist don't touch them. So you should be fine. They will not come looking for me? Shaggy caught the hitch at the end of Wayne's sentence and raised an eyebrow. Wayne raised a hand and moved closer to Shaggy. There are outliers in any group and the purists have some doozies. Some even try to hunt mutts for sport. It doesn't often work out for them. But it's something to watch out for. Shaggy nodded as Wayne turned him back toward the door they had come through. Shaggy gave Wayne another questioning look, but the big man shrugged his shoulders. You have removed yourself from any politics. I mean, there would be an issue of hunting rights and purist patrols. But you aren't really in those areas. You have George to thank for that. So all I can say is watch out for the other two wars in your hunting grounds and try to maintain the peace. Any disputes can be brought to me for arbitration. But most prefer to fight it out. Murphy and Crumb are good neighbors who stick to themselves. So unless you have questions. Shaggy racked his brain, but really he wanted to be out on the hunt again. Taking apart George's operation. He wasn't sure what protection Wayne was giving his pack, but Vance had seemed to trust the mongrel leader. So Shaggy shook the man's hand again and shrugged his shoulders. Shaggy waved his pack out the door as he waved a hand over his shoulder. Sounds of frivolity and conversation started up again in the large room. Wayne was already talking to Zargus and Shaggy was sure he saw the rabbit pointing at the map again. But the doors shut themselves before he could get a good enough look. Once the doors were shut, Shaggy watched as they shimmered and disappeared completely. He snorted. It made sense. The large wooden room clashed with the rest of the bar. The place was a little more empty, even though only 30 minutes or so had passed. Vic and Rita moved for the door as Sybil grabbed hold of Tom. The resident pain in the ass was struggling to get to the bar, but Shaggy growled and he gave up. They needed to get back to their turf they could eat on the way. Now that they were done, they could get down to the real fun. Sure, some of them would have to watch the kids, but the rest could finally take it to the bunch. Shaggy was so wound up for a fight that he didn't notice the others of his pack were standing still until he ran into Seacrest. Snapping out of it, Shaggy glanced up and followed his pack's combined gaze across the street. Surprisingly, their illegally parked car was still there. But there was an old man, leaning up against the trunk. Shaggy growled, annoyed, and he felt his annoyance echoed from his pack, although it was for a different reason. Where the hell is he going to sit? Tom groaned. Shaggy tried not to laugh as he rushed across the street. If the old man was here, that meant he had a job, or something had gone wrong with the last one. He skidded to a stop next to their stolen car, and he felt the others making their way toward him. Once they were all together, Shaggy asked, "Obadiah, what can we do for you?" The old spook groaned as he stopped leaning on the car and stretched. Once he was done, he looked them all over. "We need to talk about that stuff you found." Shaggy felt a shiver go up his spine, and he groaned. He would never have his own gang war. Shaggy watched as another businessman hurriedly rushed out of the door. The fast food joint had been decently full when they had first walked in. Maybe it was their weapons, armor, or even the fact that they rolled in and ordered nothing. Obadiah had led Shaggy to a booth and sat down in silence. Rita and the others moved toward the counter and ordered food before sitting apart, but close enough to Shaggy and Obadiah. It was when his pack had sat themselves that the first of the patrons hurriedly rushed out the door. They were quickly followed by the others until the final businessman was out the door. Shaggy raised an eyebrow and crossed his arms. "So?" Obadiah grunted as he looked around the room. Behind the counter, pimpled teens were watching them with undisguised suspicion. An older man in a white dress shirt and tie walked from the back kitchen to the counter. He whispered something to both cashiers, whose eyes seemed to pop with surprise. With more suspicious looks, the two boys hurried toward the back. Obadiah gave the older man a wave and turned back to Shaggy. "You know, if you try to kill me in a fast food place, I'm gonna be pissed off. Especially if you don't feed me." Obadiah's mask of professionalism cracked slightly before he got a handle on it. "No one's going to attack you. Just making sure we're clear. Besides, the way I hear it, it would take some high-grade poisons or acids to get through your healing." Shaggy felt his eyebrows draw down as he frowned. Immediately he thought of the professor. Had the lizard player told the NPC about his powers? But Obadiah was already shaking his head. "I've been monitoring you ever since our mutual friend introduced us. I don't have the full picture, but the people I work for have you listed as a C-tier threat." Shaggy grunted. Slightly affronted. "What's an A-tier?" "Pray you never find out." Obadiah twisted his head, as though listening for something. After a few seconds, he faced Shaggy again. "That is all besides the point. It seems we are now free to converse." "About the last job?" "Yes. Something you sent us alarmed my superiors a great deal. I have been sent to verify that the items you procured were, in fact, from the target's house." Shaggy's face scrunched in confusion. "How does that work?" "The tab. The items were encrypted. Way beyond what my team is capable of." "I know that. But the people above me just want to make sure." "Okay. So, are we waiting for them?" Obadiah shook his head. "No. I just need you to answer my questions. Clear?" Shaggy shrugged. Which Obadiah seemed to take as an affirmative because placed both of his hands on the table and stared Shaggy in the eye. Shaggy maintained eye contact and tiredly stared into the old man's blue eyes. He felt the other members of his pack tense slightly, as though wanting to rise to a perceived challenge. But he mentally ordered them to focus on their food. Question 1. Your group assaulted the target's house a few nights ago. Correct? Yes. Question 2. You searched the premises for any and all data storage devices. Correct? Yep. Question 3. You found one K-Tech brand Pluraculus computer and a generic K-Tech Oxali tablet. Correct? Shaggy rolled his eyes. He wasn't aware of the brands that Rita had grabbed. She had just snatched what was in the office. For all he knew, those brands were way off. But he nodded anyway. "I need verbal confirmation," Obadiah stated harshly. "Also, maintain eye contact at all times." Shaggy heard chairs scrape the linoleum floor of the fast food place. Rita and Vic had stood quickly, and Shaggy could feel them wanting to go for their weapons. He calmed them as best he could as he stared back into Obadiah's eyes. For the first time, he noticed that the blue of the old man's eyes was swirling slightly, and he thought he caught a red glow somewhere behind the right one. Shaggy felt his eyes widen as he remembered that the old spook was a cyborg. Whoever was in charge was probably watching his reactions right now. Obadiah inclined his head slightly as Shaggy's thoughts must have appeared on his face. Yes. Though I'm not sure if those brands are correct. We didn't check. Obadiah's eyes swirled, and he nodded. Understandable. Question 4. You then engaged with some kind of home security device, which resulted in the building being set on fire. Yes. We engaged with 2 robots, which we destroyed, and then the house caught fire. Obadiah's head twitched. Like someone yelled in his ears. After collecting himself, Obadiah asked another question. The house caught fire because of the robots? Shaggy grimaced. Nope. What followed was a long silence, where Shaggy assumed Obadiah was speaking with his minders. Meanwhile, Shaggy felt his pack finish their food and move closer to his table. The booth he and Obadiah sat in wasn't large, but one of his pack could have joined them if they wanted to. Instead, Sybil and Vic took a table parallel to Shaggy, while Rita and Seacrest each sat in a booth bracketing Obadiah and Shaggy. Tom was yet again gone. Sneaky bastard was probably back in the kitchen getting more food. Once the cyberspook was done with his silent conversation, he came back to himself. He spared Shaggy's pack a glance before he continued. Skipping the house fire. Question 5. Of the other items you may or may not have taken from the house, was anything related to the Fae? Shaggy again focused on telling a half-truth. Yes, we found several books on portals to and from the Fae and a power crystal. The crystal has since been repurposed as an energy source for our home. Although I think we have the books. Levy had them, boss. Don't think she took them with her, though. Rita supplied. The jerking of Obadiah's neck told Shaggy that he wasn't getting away with half-truths. Clearly, whatever was watching them had some pretty decent lie detectors. Obadiah sat in silence for a short time again before he came back to the conversation. There was nothing else? Shaggy blew out a breath. In truth, he didn't want to tell the cyborg's government handlers about the pixie. They clearly didn't care enough to protect them the first time. But hopefully by now, Levy and her friends were on their way to the Fae realm. So what could the government do? If anything, they needed to know about the magical shitstorm that the K-Tech Corporation had kicked off. Sitting forward, Shaggy glared into the old man's eyes. Peering beyond them, to whatever entities were watching. Obadiah's eyes grew wide as the camera, or whatever it was, behind them whirled. The man's face was stone, but Shaggy was pleased to see shock and revulsion in his bearing. Even a scent wafted on the air, one that raised Shaggy's hackles slightly. It was another indescribable scent, much like fear. But Shaggy guessed it was anger. That why you burned the house down? Obadiah asked, and Shaggy assumed that the question was from the old man himself, so he simply nodded. Obadiah muttered under his breath, and Shaggy didn't focus enough to listen. Instead, a small clamor from the back of the restaurant brought his eyes toward the counter. Tom was there, leaping over the counter with a brown bag. Shaggy rolled his eyes at the lanky man, but Tom raised the bag in triumph as he rushed over. When he got to Shaggy's table, he placed the bag in front of Shaggy and smiled. Pleasantly surprised, Shaggy grinned back at Tom and opened the bag. The smell of burgers and fries hit his nose, and he immediately started in. From behind, he heard Rita mutter something that sounded like "kiss ass." But he ignored it. "Where's the pixie now?" Obadiah's voice said from behind the large brown paper bag. Shaggy grunted and looked up. On her way back home. At her requests. She went alone? Hell no. My wife and a few of her friends went with her. Obadiah sat back in his chair again and seemed to confer with his compatriots again. Shaggy took the break and dove into his meal with gusto. The way his body burned through calories made every meal a necessity. Not to mention it powered his healing. So it paid to be topped up. As he shoved a handful of fries into his mouth, he saw Obadiah slump in his seat. His pack tensed as they watched, clearly cautious of the old man. But Obadiah merely grunted before swearing. "Shit, son. This is not how I saw my day going." Shaggy glanced up and studied the old man's face. "Your passengers gone? Catastrophe?" Sybil asked. Shaggy noticed that she and Vic had their pistols out and on the slim table that sat between them. Obadiah didn't bat an eye at the weaponry. "Yeah. Although that might be too light of a word. Talks with the other realms were already dodgy at best. The Fae didn't trust us to begin with, and with this shit come to light." Shaggy simply nodded as the old man trailed off. It was a nightmare for somebody. But that was way above his head. For now, he just wanted to get back to their burgeoning home and maybe punch a few gangsters. Obadiah glanced around at all of them before returning his gaze to Shaggy. Shaggy raised an eyebrow as he spoke around a mouthful of burger. "How was your job supposed to go?" "I was here investigating the HLO overreaching their station. Instead, I find that the biggest company in Texas is kidnapping extraplanar creatures." "Why ask us to hit a K-Tech employee if you weren't investigating them?" Rita asked. Obadiah shrugged. Jerusa had ties to several high-level handlers at the HLO. "I was hoping to find evidence of bribery or something. Not something on this level." This was way beyond what I expected. "What's going to happen to K-Tech?" asked Seacrass. "Nothing," Shaggy said simply. He may not have had a handle on how big K-Tech truly was. But Shaggy at least understood that something like this was going to get burned out of K-Tech before the government even moved. A glance at Obadiah showed that the old man agreed. But Seacrass still seemed confused. "Nothing? How is that possible? They are torturing sentient beings." Obadiah sighed. "All of that can be placed squarely on Jerusa's shoulders. None of her notes implicate K-Tech, and I will bet that Pixie Survivor doesn't know if it was done on K-Tech orders either. Sure, it looks bad, but any half-decent lawyer can argue that the company was unaware of what Jerusa was doing. They'll get slapped with a fine for negligence, but probably nothing else. Meanwhile, talks between our side and the Fae will take a massive hit." "What were you trying to get from the Fae?" "Magic operates differently in the Fae realms. It permeates everything there and, as such, the sentient beings from that realm are heavyweights with magic. Not to mention the flora and fauna. The trees from the Fae realm alone would make for some hefty building material." "Pfft. So you want their resources?" Vic said as he lit up a cigarette. Sybil moved away from the smoker as Shaggy wondered where the sharpshooter had gotten a pack of cigarettes. "I don't want anything from them. The government saw an opportunity for shared commerce. But the Fae courts have been reticent. If you think that's the case now, wait till my wife and that pixie meet with the court," Shaggy said, crumbling up the brown paper bag. "Will they believe her, boss? For all we know, they might just attack Levy. If they have the pixie with them, they'll be safe. The courts have a way of discerning truth from lie. If what you've told me is true, then those courts are going to be pissed," Obadiah said. "Bah. It's not our problem," Shaggy said as he stood and found a trash can. "Not to say it's not important. But we've got smaller fish to fry." Returning to Obadiah, he asked, "Do you still have work for us?" Obadiah wobbled his head, non-committal. "I have to check with my own handlers. We might shift our targets. But if you're still willing, watch that old tablet I gave you." Shaggy nodded and waved a hand at his pack. There was some mild grumbling, but they all made their way toward the door. Shaggy watched them go until it was just him and Obadiah. When he was sure everyone was gone, he leaned over and met eyes with the cyborg. "Tell me, is my wife really safe? Over there?" Obadiah shrugged. "It's not without its dangers. But she seemed capable. Not to mention, the pixie will be a force unto itself when it's back in its home realm." Shaggy nodded before another question came to him. How much do your people know about what me and mine are up to? Not to put too fine a point on it. But, really, none of my higher-ups care. No offense, but your organization isn't exactly in their weight class. Government mandate is to let the locals handle the small fish. Even for a C-tier? Shaggy asked, curious. Obadiah chuckled. Ha ha ha. That's just you, kid. Your organization as a whole barely makes the charts. If at all. Shaggy grimaced as he thought about that. It was true, really. His group was still very much small potatoes in the grand scheme of things. Maybe that was for the best. He gave the old cyberspook a half-hearted wave before he followed his pack out onto the street. As he did, he was happy to see them all waiting in the parking lot. He shook himself as he remembered what else they needed to accomplish today. They still needed to get back to their territory and start dealing with the bunch. That was a threat they could manage, and it didn't come with government nonsense mixed in. He just hoped Levy was careful. Although he did briefly wonder what magic would look like in a magic-rich environment like the Fae. He shuddered as Sybil pointed toward a large van on the opposite side of the street. Shaggy grinned as he felt his pack's elation. Another day, another stolen vehicle. Hopefully, this time, they wouldn't be squashed in like sardines. Although he made sure to call shotgun as Sybil started working on the locks.